Come, draw close, and feel the power of the Heardstone. Your best location for Warhammer Fantasy Battle lore, hobby, and gameplay discussion. Welcome to the Heardstone, your Warhammer Fantasy Battle podcast. Today we have a Black Library review. We're going to be looking at Riders of the Dead by Dan Abnett. You can find the Riders of the Dead story. You can probably purchase the book on its own through eBay or Amazon, but you can also get it in the Warhammer Chronicles compendium called Empire at War. So the Warhammer Chronicles Empire at War, it's the first book in that set of books that you can buy all together. And that's a recent release, so it still should be available, at least at the time that this podcast is released. And with me today we have...
Hot Mike here, ready to go, ready to talk about Riders of the Dead.
I'm Kerry. I go by KMorris27 on the Discord.
All right. Well, before we jump into the book today, I do want to ask if you've been getting to do any Warhammer Fantasy Battle related stuff.
Yes, I have. I got to play a game earlier today. We're recording here on Saturday night, and I got to play one of our Discord members, Rule, real name Brian, and
I didn't get to see the battle report yet, so I'm excited to hear how it went.
Yeah, I've been last minute reading Riders of the Dead. No, I actually read Riders of the Dead like 2 months ago, and then had to wait for other people. But anyways, I played
the shade.
I played Brian earlier today at our FLGS, and I rolled 2,500 points of 8th edition, and I brought out my Dark Elves, and Brian brought his Orcs and Goblins, and we had a good afternoon playing some Warhammer Fantasy Battles. We have a tournament next month that Ryan is also going to be attending, and Brian's going to be attending, and I'm going to be attending here in Texas, and we're all looking forward to that at the end of June.
And we're going to get to meet some other Discord members. There's a few others that are going to be there, so that's exciting.
Other than that, I've been painting and building. I've been working on some Bretonnians. I don't know if what army I'm going to take to the tournament yet, but I've been painting some Bretonnian Knights of the Realm, Knights Errant, and I've also been working on a unit of Leopold's Leopard Company from the Dogs of War range. I'm thinking about making a Dogs of War army here in the future, and those models really captured me when I was a youngster, and so I'm really happy to be able to paint them up now.
Yeah, they've looked really good. Seeing those models, and also you got to play Brian. You got to see his new Mangler Squig model that he's been painting up for the tournament. How did that look? It looked really good online.
Yeah, Brian's list was changed up a little bit from when we previously played. You know, he's kind of newer to the game, so his collection isn't as extensive, but he's been adding to it, and now he's able to change his list up a little bit with different models. And so he brought out the Mangler Squig, and we got to play with that for the first time, and let it do its thing. So it was a lot of fun. I'll let everyone read my battle report that I'll put on the Discord tonight or tomorrow, probably tomorrow.
I have to know this though. You targeted the Mangler Squig with all your bolt throwers, didn't you?
Actually, no. It was hard to see it because the forest rules we were using with regards to blocking line of sight, and I got the first turn, but at the bottom of the one, it advanced 17 inches on 3 dice. So basically, at the top of turn 2, it was already on my lines, and no spoilers, but I went and landed a unit of sacrificial people to die.
Wise, and very, very Druchii-like. What about you, Kerry? What have you been doing?
So most recent thing was got together a decent draft, but I say decent, but that's my opinion, of my Armies Project Zulu theme army list. So that's just gone up on community content on the Discord a couple of days ago.
Nice.
It's been something I've been working on for a while. It's not the one I've been working on longest for a while, the Ethiopian themed one, but that's nowhere near ready yet. So
is this something that's going to show up in Warhammer Armies Project? Is that what you're saying?
No, this is where you're sort of taking the Armies Project rewrite of the rules and then creating additional army supplements off your own bat.
Got it.
It's a personal project. So the Ethiopian one shared with a few other people, but I've got a few side ones as well. So Zulus, Mali, sort of African beast men, and it's really looking at fleshing out that part of the world, because there's a sort of very
there's a dearth of that.
there's just a lack of representation of Africa in fantasy in general, and it
Mm-hmm.
does put some people off when they're not seeing, well, where am I in this? Where's my representation
Right.
in this? Where's my culture even getting a look in this?
Cool. Well, I also saw you got some models for that. Where'd you get those models?
There's an awful lot of Zulus from the Kerry range for that army. There's also some from Empress Miniatures, some from North Star. There's an awful lot of ranges that make Zulus. There's
Okay.
there's not a lot of ranges that make Zulus that can easily step into the role of fantasy wizard as well.
Right. Right. Yeah, I do remember back when I read a bunch of I don't know if anyone else did this, the military history magazines that you could buy.
MHQ?
Well, yes, that would be one of them.
Yeah, I've got a ton of MHQ.
Yeah. So that, and they would always have the advertisement for plastic miniatures for World War II miniatures, but also some of them would be Zulu or other groups. I don't know. Yeah, so that just makes me think of those.
I used to go to my Barnes and Noble to get the MHQ. I think it's a quarterly magazine, so I guess it was 4 times a year. I'd go to the Barnes and Noble magazine stand to get the MHQ, and then one time at a local library sale, I got a ton of hardback versions of MHQ that had gone back for a couple decades. So when I was a kid, I was really into that.
Yeah, I did. I subscribed to two different Civil War ones, and then also a World War II one. It'd actually be really interesting to go back and see how history was represented in those magazines that were for a popular audience, and just see what they talked about, what they saw other people as, what the general culture is interested in. Anyway, that's an aside though. But yeah, makes me think of those. Have you gotten any battles in, Kerry?
No, unfortunately, with two children under 3 in the house, getting battles in's been a bit of a tricky one.
Oh, I'm sure you're getting many battles in, but they're not Warhammer Fantasy Battle related.
Actually, though, I did introduce my 2-year-old daughter to Warhammer. The joys of having quite a lot of spare models, including Orc Araboy 6th edition, Old Monopers Dwarf 6th edition, is you have some of these that are incredibly resilient, and you can just give them to the 2-year-old and say, right, we're going to play this on this little table.
Yeah, there's nothing small or fiddly on those models. The bows are super thick. Everything's going to be safe from a 2-year-old on those.
Battonians were her favourite, and the old 5th edition knights were just running everyone down.
Oh, nice.
I was happy to see Kerry's Zulu themed army, because I've taken an interest in the last couple of years with regards to the Zulu Wars and Isandawana and Lord Chelmsford and Rorke's Drift and all that. I think it's a fascinating point of Imperial history, and so
back when the History Channel actually did shows that were history rather than aliens or ice road truckers or whatever it is that they do now. I remember they had some shows on the Zulu, and it was always very fascinating. Well, I have been, of course, preparing for the tournament. I'm taking Tzeentch Warriors of Chaos, so I've been painting a tree man, because why would I prepare the chariot and war altar and knight and 3 more chosen that I need to get done before the tournament? I painted a treeman, so that's how I've been slacking off. I don't think, let's see, other than that, I haven't really gotten any battles in recently. I got to introduce my son to Warhammer Fantasy. I played Brian, and I brought my son and a neighbor, and I had VC, and Brian had his orcs and goblins, and so we got in as much of a game as we could. My son was interested for about 1.5 turns, and then he kind of drifted off and wanted to do other stuff. So he's 7; he's getting there. We'll see how that goes. He still loves a lot of other war games and stuff. So my tree man will be entered in the monthly contest on the Discord. which does remind me that I should let you all know, if you want to join us on the Warhammer Fantasy Battle Discord, you should definitely find us, search for us on Discord. You can get us there. If you want to ask questions about the podcast or about specific episodes of the podcast, you can visit the Discord. I toss a request up saying, what do you have about this book? You can ask those, or you can just ask at any time. My name is Ryan. I'm Kugelfang52 on the Discord. That's where you can find me. Then let's get to this. We're going to enter the spoiler-free section. So if you want to read the book and don't want to know what's happening, you can still listen to this part. I will let you know when we're putting in the spoilers when I tell you that we are entering the Drachwald. So this is the spoiler-free phase. Today we're going to be talking about Riders of the Dead. And who can tell me why we're reading this book? Why did we choose Riders of the Dead? We've done Drachenfels, one of the first major books. We've done Heldenhammer, sets up Sigmar. Why Riders of the Dead?
I'm pretty sure one of the podcasters, when we were talking about book reviews and doing this in general, said, we have to do this book.
I think I know who that was. I think that person may be in the room with us right now, or the at least theoretical room.
It does ring a bell, yeah.
Mike, why are we reading this book?
Yeah, it may disquiet our listeners to know that there's no great plan with regards to what we read, and we were talking about Black Library books that were good and that we should read, and I suggested Riders of the Dead because I remember reading it a couple of times over the last 20 years and thinking it's one of the better Black Library books I've ever read, and there's no grand chronological plan with what we are doing with regards to Black Library books.
Mike.
Is there?
Because you don't see the plan doesn't mean there isn't a plan. Sometimes change is the plan itself.
Yeah, so this moves us from Heldenhammer, which was 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, right up to pretty much the present age of Warhammer Fantasy Battles in the time of Karl Franz and in the time of 8th edition. Well, 6th edition, 8th edition.
Yeah, so we chose this because Mike said it was really good. And I won't spoil anything, but he was right. It is very good. So tell me, what's the book about, Mike? In your words. We'll ask Kerry and I'll give my spiel in just a minute, but what's the book about?
So I've read a lot of Black Library books, and I would say Dan Abnett's Riders of the Dead, from a literary point of view, is one of the best, if not the best book from the Black Library that I have to recommend. I think Dan Abnett's a good writer. He has an ability to write battle scenes that are captivating, but also the book has a fair amount of soul and ability to speak to the human condition. And so I think it's a really a captivating read. The book is about what we know as the Storm of Chaos and the role of two Imperials in the beginning stages of the Storm of Chaos and those two individuals' fates as the campaign develops over about 18 months or 12 months in 1521 and 2521 and 2522 of the Imperial calendar. And we get to follow these two individuals and share their experiences. And it's well written and it's very thoughtful.
All right, Kerry, what would you say it's about?
To go a bit more tongue-in-cheek, this is one of those narratives where the white Western European stereotype gets immersed in another culture, takes on some aspects of that culture and has some epiphany moments, and then turns out to have a significant destiny, that story. Except this time round, there's two of them that end up in opposing cultures. So they're going to have to solve the problems of the culture they're immersed in against each other. So this is as if you're watching The Last Samurai or Avatar, except it's a versus showdown between two people doing this in parallel.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. So I would agree with both what Mike and Kerry said. I think those are great. Um, I also would add to it that this is a book that's about two unimportant or relatively unimportant men and how they can still play a role in big events that are going on in important ways. So um, I think this book plays a lot with that idea of people that you might say are not that great, not that big a deal, and how can they shape something as big as the storm of chaos? Can they, or will they not? So that's just in addition to this idea of being in different cultures and this being part of the storm of chaos. So I think that's something else that this book is about.
Change is a major theme.
Before we go too far down this road, this isn't actually the Storm of Chaos yet. This is the Spring Driving. We're in the prologue of the Storm of Chaos very firmly.
Okay, so what's the difference? So the storm of chaos, is this years before the storm of chaos, or is it just the year before?
With a year before. This is the Vanguard, but they don't realize that at the time.
It's not considered part of the storm of chaos. It's just like a prologue-y thing.
This is prologue.
Okay.
There are 4 novels brought out by Black Library that form an interlinked narrative about the Spring Driving. So we have Rides the Dead, we have Mage Storm, and we have the 2 Ambassador Chronicles novels, so The Ambassador and Urson's Teeth. If you read all of these sort of together, you get the whole of the Spring Driving campaign. And that does explain some of the narrative choices Dan Abnett is forced into, certainly in the second half of the novel.
Okay, so that's helpful. And that fits with, Mike, what you were saying before we started recording about this book being published before the Storm of Chaos campaign that players got to take part in. Is that right?
I would defer to Kerry with regards to the dates. This was published in March of 2003, and I know the Storm of Chaos is really a forefront of the GW Warhammer Fantasy campaign and world in the spring and summer of 2004.
So the idea was you could have theoretically read all 4 of these novels, and then the Storm of Chaos comes out, and the first sort of bits you were getting in White Dwarf was, hey, remember what happened last year? That was just the beginning. That was just the guys at the very front of the wave.
Okay, so we mentioned some of the themes of this book, but I think it's important to keep in mind, and for anyone who's going to be reading this on their own, if you like these themes, you'll like this book. The idea of acculturation, I thought, was a really fascinating theme in this book. I'll talk a little bit more about why, but just this idea of 2 people being placed into cultures that they're not comfortable with and don't know beforehand is a really fascinating part of this book. Mike, you had another thing, less about a theme, but more about the literature of the book. What was it that you liked?
Are we in the spoiler-free section, Ryan?
We are.
So I shouldn't talk about spoilers?
Correct. But you can still talk about the character development.
Sure. So with our 2 characters, we see a literary device, if that's the proper term, where we have the change and transition of a character over time that is subtle for most of the book. And this resembles examples from 19th century literature that I've read, such as Diary of a Madman by Nikolai Gogol, who was a Ukrainian 19th century author who wrote Diary of the Madman, which is about a Russian bureaucrat who doesn't notice at the beginning that he is slowly descending into madness. And
Whoa, spoilers, Mike. This is a spoiler free. Oh, yeah. It's okay. I guess you can spoil Diary of a Madman. Never mind. Go ahead.
I don't know that too many of our listeners are cross-pollinating with 19th century Ukrainian novellas.
I assume they are.
They're a well-cultured group, I assume, but yeah, this idea that you're reading the book and you're seeing the character that you don't notice it and quite so much, but you see these subtle signs in the literature that your character is not what you think they are, and that they're changing, and that they're either slipping into madness or they're subtly changing over the course of time, and the writing changes and develops this transition. And it's fascinating to see.
Okay, and Kerry, there's the other one. Did you want to talk about it, or do you want me to talk about the other theme that kind of is there?
So the other real theme is the concept of fate, destiny, and change. We look at the idea of how chaos and chaos worshipping cultures see the world. We have a look at how their how their culture and how sort of their sort of shamanistic practices respond to the what to us or the empire would be abnormal or inexplicable, and what meaning they put upon this and what they anticipate is going to happen based on this. But we've got multiple characters on the chaos side making predictions of the future, and how that all then pans out is sort of essentially half the narrative in this book. On the other side, the demilancer who's going to become immersed in Kislevite culture, fate doesn't. They talk about how destiny works early on in that narrative, but it isn't until quite late in that narrative that the idea of having this fixed fate really starts getting pushed. It all
Right.
And in terms of change, well, Mike's already discussed this idea of, and in terms of change, we've got this sort of concept of acculturation from the previous theme. We've got the idea of character development, but this is an underlying part of the spiritualism on the Kurgan side, so on the chaos side, whereas on the Kislevite side, this is something that happens, but it isn't sort of a cornerstone of their spiritual beliefs in the same way. So you've got this contrast of a culture where change is actually a god versus it is no matter. This is always as it was going to be.
Right. And there's also gonna be a sense of they are gonna understand change as different from fate, kind of, but they're gonna understand it differently. And so yeah, you get to see these two different tracks of how people understand fate and change, and it is really, I think, pretty fascinating. So that gets us to this question. We've already talked about when this is. It's the year 2521. It's right before the storm, and early 2522. It's right before the storm of chaos. But how does this fit into Warhammer lore? Maybe even for those who don't know what Storm of Chaos is, what's going on?
So Storm of Chaos was the proto version of the End Times back in 6th edition. This is the hordes of chaos under Archaon the Everchosen are gathering. They are coming south, and they are going to wreck stuff. So this narrative, the spring driving, really was the prelude to that, where you got essentially a whole year of Black Library publishing across 4 novels that acted as a narrative prologue to the campaign that then came the following year, 2004. What you've got here...
Was this the introduction of Archaon? Was it with...
Archaon,
or was he already introduced?
Archaon had been around for years. I think he was definitely around back in 5th edition with a model and everything. Archaon's re-release in 6th edition with his new model that people will be more familiar with, because it was current right up until the end of the world, before he got the big plastic dragon in Age of Sigmar. He had come back into the narrative with his new model, and he'd killed Volkmar the Grim in his inaugural battle. That was later retconned. He'd been crowned as the Everchosen, as the Lord of the End Times, and then they sort of put a pin in that for a couple of years, and now it's all kicking off. And if anyone's familiar with how Storm of Chaos ended, it didn't necessarily pan out as GW or the fans wanted.
Right. I mean, from what I've understood, from pretty early on, the writers at GW and of Warhammer Fantasy Battle had this idea in mind that the world was going to end, and that they created Archaon to be the one who ended the Warhammer Fantasy Battle world. And when you read the army books, you see that they talk about that this is coming. I mean, this book will talk about that evil or chaos is never ending, and it's going to win at some point, and they're just holding it at bay. So, at this point, I think that GW had in mind maybe not the end times, but some sort of end times event that would end the Warhammer Fantasy Battle world. I don't know that they thought about what that would mean for the game necessarily, but from what I've read or remember reading, at least, they did have that in mind. Is that right?
That's what's been discussed sort of subsequently, and the idea that actually the end times wasn't something that came out of nowhere. They really wanted to do a hard reset of that part of the franchise because of both the narrative inertia and also the fact it just wasn't selling, and they needed, or in their mind, they needed to do a significant rebranding for commercial reasons.
Does that work with how? I mean, Sixth was pretty popular. Does that idea of it wasn't selling work when you apply that to Sixth, though?
I think that the number that's quoted sometimes is that the standard 40k tactical marine squad plus the Lord of the Rings Uruk-hai plastic set, plastic regiment, those two combined were selling more than the entirety of fantasy battles in terms of units around this time.
Even in Sixth, wow. Okay.
I was an active player in Sixth, and at that time, Warhammer Fantasy Battles was still very much a much less popular game than 40k or even Lord of the Rings to a lesser extent. So Warhammer Fantasy Battles was still having a hard time, even in this time period. Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Good to know. Okay. Anything else about how this book fits into Warhammer lore? I think we can tell what happens afterwards. Do we want to talk about? Actually, let's save that. We'll talk about what happens after this at the end of the book. So
you can mention what happens before. I think it's relevant to note that the Great War against Chaos that Magnus the Pious fought was in 2302 to about 2304, and what we're seeing here with the Storm of Chaos a couple hundred years later is basically the next installation of a great invasion from the north that they know it's happened in the past, and they're wary of the fact that it can happen again. And many people think it's only a matter of time. And the time comes about 220 years after the Great War against Chaos, where Magnus the Pious saved the Empire and became the Emperor.
That's if you ignore the Great Invasion of 2505 that's in Gotrek and Felix Beastslayer, and you ignore the Great Invasion of 2515 that's in the Big Red Book. There's a lot of great invasions of late, because that's what happens when you have a fixed timeline and trying to make everything happen, relatively recently.
So who are the guys who invade at those times? It's not always Archaon. Who's invading during those other ones?
So during the time of Magnus the Pious, it's Asavar Kol, and Magnus the Pious leads a united Imperial force up to the outskirts of Prague, where they're able to turn back the invasion.
And still has time to put his hands on Genevieve in a way that was non-consensual.
Ooh.
If you just a call back to our previous Drachenfels review, because she says that he was a bit handsy.
Oh.
Just a correction, it's outside the gates of the city of Kislev, I think, where Magnus the Pious is victorious and Prague had fallen.
And then in 2505, it's Arek Demon Claw, who's only in that novel and the Gotrek and Felix book previous to it. Whereas the invasion of 2515, this is covered within the section of the Big Red Book for 8th edition that is sort of a supplement within the rule book about doing massive battles of like 10,000 points aside sort of thing. And it follows this narrative whereby Osterland is invaded because of revenge quest by a particular Norscan leader who gets his own special rules in this supplement, and it's all to try and kill the son of someone we're going to be talking about much later on in this review, the Elector Count von Rauken, who rules as Prince of Wolfenburg. So this does tie together, but we're only talking 6 years earlier. There was this giant invasion of roughly the same territory, and this is sort of the big problem when you're really covering the same ground, but you don't want to change your special characters out, and you don't want to really have to go too far back in history. Obviously, until the Old World, where they're now saying, actually, instead of treading across the same 5-10 years, maybe if we jump 200 years back, we're going to have a bit more breathing space.
Right. So here's another question from the lore uninformed. In which invasion is Prague destroyed?
Mike's one. The Great War Against Chaos.
The Great War Against Chaos. Okay, that's the one where it like gets melted or something, right?
Yeah, and Magnus has to just purge the entire thing and start again from the ground up, and it is still haunted by the dead from that time. But in that invasion, it's sort of you get a bit with Kolek Sunny to just can look over the walls of Prague, and you get an idea of the scale of some of these characters.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Okay, so we've seen a little bit of the Warhammer lore. This is yet another invasion. And it's funny because they call this, the year that no one forgets? Not to exaggerate. It's happened like 3 times before in the past 25 years. Or 50 years.
It's also worth noting that the way this book has been written, there's a couple of sections that go into third person and are written after the fact and look at in-universe historical accounts of these events, which then, since that we now know the end, we're going straight into the end times, there probably wasn't that much opportunity to write a decent historiography of any of this, so it sort of can take you out of it a little bit if you think about that too much.
So what I'm hearing is it's better to be ignorant of Warhammer lore like me than it is to have too much like you. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's probably for our listeners. You're better off forgetting the end times ever happened, and given that's probably your standpoint anyway, it validates
most Warhammer fantasy players, that is their viewpoint. Yeah.
Honestly, I tried to forget the Storm of Chaos happened after it happened too, because the ending was just, you know how it ends. So.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get to the ending. All right. Keep listening or you'll miss the ending. Haha. That's some good podcasting right there. Okay, so let's talk about what factions are we getting to discuss? Who are we going to see? If people are interested in factions, which ones are they going to get to see?
Yeah, so the 2 major factions that are present in this book are the Empire, which is the largest human faction in the old world Warhammer Fantasy universe.
Ooh, wait a second. Mike has put himself into a corner because he said the 2 major factions, and then he said the Empire. And I would say there's 2 more. So I'm going to see which one he says is the other major faction. Go, Mike.
Yeah, and then Warriors of Chaos would be the obvious choice for the other major faction. If Ryan has 2 other major factions that are prominent.
Kislev players are crying in the corner right now, and they're quite upset.
It's a bit of a stretch to say Kislev is a standalone faction. I was there at the birth of Kislev, really, as a playable type of thing in Warhammer Fantasy around this time, and they got about half a dozen units, and they were pretty much an auxiliary to the Empire. To quantify them as their own faction is a bit of a stretch.
I guess I was thinking of like lore faction versus tabletop playable faction. So anyway, Kerry, what were you going to say though?
I was agreeing with Mike that, if you're going to talk major factions, then saying I'm drawing the line of did they have a playable army book at the time of publications, a decent way to define major. In terms of minor ones, we do have Kislev, as Ryan said. We've also got Dogs of War in there. They've got a contingent running around. Again, it's not expanded on as much in this book, but some of these units are going to crop up in the Ambassador Chronicles, and we get some more about what's going on with, for instance, the Dogs of War contingent from Talia.
I do have to take this moment to put in the statement that I do not consider Dogs of War to be a faction. They are hipster. No one should ever play them. They don't count.
I know that Kerry's going to agree with me because he's very learned in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and Ryan's not. But Dogs of War are much more of a real faction than Kislev, like 1,000 times more.
Dogs of War had a much more playable army list when this was published than Kislev did. Kislev, it was explicitly an allied contingent. You could use it on its own if you wanted to, whereas Dogs of War had a full playable army list that was repeated in a couple of compendiums.
Yeah, even though it was like just only a Ravening's Hordes list in the 2003 and 2004 compendium, was very kind of bare bones. It was still a real thing, and they had a 5th edition army book. Whereas Kislev, some hipsters tried to stretch it into a full army, and they were publishing White Dwarves and stuff as, hey, look at this, but in actuality, it was not really a viable.
You had the free allied contingents that came with White Dwarf as its own little army book supplement in 6th. You also had the Citadel Journal Kislev army list that fans had done that then sort of got a stamp of approval.
All I know is, after reading this book, I definitely am excited to see Kislev in the old world, because it seems really fun, and I like the characters. So I hope that it gets an update, and I hope that it's in the old world, and I look forward to playing it if it is.
When we were talking about most popular factions on the Discord the other day, and someone said, "Oh, well, the Kislev icon is one of the least popular," I was like, "That's not a real faction. It's not a real faction. That's not fair."
Not everyone picks their faction on the Discord based on what they actually play. I mean, the one that I use is just because I can read the writing against my preferred contrast better.
That'll work as well. All right, so what we see Empire, we see Warriors of Chaos, but specifically the Kurgan, and we see Kislev.
Now, the Kurgan are almost impossible to make using any of the traditional Warriors of Chaos books. They are mounted horse archers with recurve bows. They've got recurve bow infantry. They've got catapults, trebuchets, ballistae. These are not the Warriors of Chaos that you're used to, that just run at you with axes on foot.
That literally don't have shooting other than a hell cannon.
So
the Marauder Cavalry have throwing axes.
Oh,
guys,
that's true. I'm sorry. Good point.
So let's be real.
So, in terms of the scope of what you'd expect, this book really pushes you out of your comfort zone with what is a Chaos army like, and it's unfortunate they never followed up on this with rules, for instance.
Yeah.
Most of what we're exposed to approximates Marauders and Marauder Horsemen and Warhounds, and every so often you get more of a Warriors of Chaos hero level type guy or a Warriors of Chaos warrior type guy.
There's a few bodyguards here and there, but most of what you're dealing with is Marauders. I think we've discussed in the previous novel review of Heldenhammer that most armies of Warriors of Chaos are going to be like 95% Marauders and Marauder level guys. Warriors are not as prolific as you would expect, having played them on the battlefield.
The lore armies look a lot different than the tabletop armies.
Yeah. Well, though when he describes some of these guys, it's definitely with like the heavier armor sets, even though he also describes them with recurve bows. So sometimes that can be a little bit odd that you see, spiked big armor, and then you also hear about them having recurve bows. But at least, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, but you don't forget how to use a bow just because you've got armor. So if their entire culture is a sort of nomadic horsemen with bows, if they start slapping on the full plate that's been given, either Chaos Dwarf made or just gifted by the gods and grafted to their flesh, they're not going to suddenly lose the bow knowledge. The big
So
thing
what
is
you're saying is, if I make Chaos Warriors with bows, I'm lore accurate.
yes, but you'd have to homebrew your own rules for them, and that's sort of the problem here.
Yeah, put something in community content, Ryan. You could draft it
That's
up.
something that's not going to happen. I think we all know that.
Or if someone happened to have done an entire supplement a couple of years ago based on this set of battles and this campaign, and was going to put it in community content straight after this episode, and already had rules in there for doing Kurgan properly, that might be useful.
No one would have done that, Kerry. No one would do that.
We shall see. Yeah, no one.
So we talked about what factions. Is there any helpful background material that people should read before this? I mean, not necessarily that they have to, but just if someone were going to read this, but they wanted to be a little bit more informed before they read it, what should they do?
Yeah, just reading something like the Empire Army book, just the 10 or 15 or 20 pages of lore that is in there will give you a solid background with regards to, it'll give you an Imperial map. It'll help you understand what the geography of the Empire is. It'll help you understand knightly orders, the types of troops. You'll see what the composition of an Imperial army. So just reading that, or the big rule book has good lore that's going to give you a solid foundation, and vice versa. The Warriors of Chaos Army book will, and pretty much any addition to between 6th, 7th, 8th, or 5th. I haven't read those books, but probably something in the same vein.
Now, the only problem with reading the Empire Army book and then reading this is that you have a lot of pikemen in this book, which you can't take as the Empire. You also can't really take demilancers in the Empire book unless you take pistoliers and squint.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are a couple of units that are placed into this book that aren't available in the Empire book, but it's not a major hurdle.
Right.
It's just worth pointing out, because you spend so much time in the heads of demilancers and then
they don't exist.
Make these.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out it'd be really cool if they made pistoliers with lances, but nope, those don't exist.
It'd be really cool if they made pistoliers that were good.
Whoa. Pistoliers are some of my favorite dudes in Empire. They're one of the reasons I play Empire.
The pistol rules in 8th are not well constructed.
They're cool. I like it.
All you really need rules-wise to make demilancers is the option for pistoliers to pay a point or so to have a spear. It's not rocket science.
Yep. All right. So that's a little. Anything else to read, or anything else to get some background understanding?
Not prior to reading this. This book actually works very well as a jumping off point. The way they handle the point of view characters, you could just come from a background of reading historical books and go straight into this.
Yeah. All right. Any other background? I mean, we've talked about a lot of background information, characters, setting. Anything else that could be helpful for readers of this book to know before they jump into this book?
Just to clarify, what are we keeping in the bit I did earlier where I was talking about the other 3 books that form a narrative, or do you want me to do it again here?
I think so. I think we're keeping that again.
Okay. I don't need to do it again.
I'd agree with Kerry that I think this book was written to be a book that someone could pick up and start to understand the Storm of Chaos and what was about to be coming out of GW in the coming months. And so it's a good book to just get your hands on and dive into, because it's really a primer for things to come over the next 24 months coming out of GW. So it's really friendly for understanding the setting, understanding the time and place, and getting things going.
It's worth noting that this is the same author that wrote the initial book of the Horus Heresy series, which is a very competent jumping off point for that lore, sort of train ride of lore information. So
Well, that actually leads us to one of our user questions. Cornello said Dan Abnett is an accomplished author, even outside of Warhammer fiction, but also within it. Where does this book rank compared to Horus Heresy, Eisenhorn, or Malice Darkblade? So you've said that Horus Rising is a good starting off point for 40K, 30K. Um, what do we say about Abnett and his other books and this book compared?
Well, but Horus Rising starting point for 30k. Eisenhorn works as a very good starting point for 40k to the grim dark Imperium sort of culture and mindset. Darkblade is a because of how Darkblade was written, starting off within Warhammer Chronicles, I believe, and then moving to novel format, it can be a little bit more jarring, certainly in terms of getting into the head of Malus, which isn't say it's bad. It's just it doesn't have the same narrative. In my opinion, it doesn't have the same narrative depth and the relatability that the other three have.
Okay, I've not read any. Yeah, I haven't read any of them.
I haven't read any of those 40k books, Ryan. I don't read 40k books.
Yeah.
Have you read Darkblade?
I actually haven't read Darkblade either. I should read Darkblade though.
I've not. Maybe we'll put it on the list. But I would say this: it is a great book. I absolutely would 100% suggest this book to anyone who's interested in Warhammer Fantasy and understanding the factions that are in this book, or just generally how things work. I think it's just it works really well, and it's good. It's well written. Would y'all agree?
I'd agree.
One more time, just before we move on. Any other background information or characters?
So
we have another user question.
Oh yes, we do. Let's go to Zumbum or Sumbum. I don't know. Sumbum asks, I'm someone fairly new to Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I've read the BRB and some army books. I haven't a clue about the Kurgans or Kislev really. Can you explain a little about their background in Warhammer Fantasy Battle and in universe? Thank you, Sumbum, for your question.
So as we've sort of covered, the Kurgans aren't normal warriors of chaos. Rather than being based on Norse and Vikings, they're more based on steppe nomad cultures, sort of the early Turks, the Tartars, Don Cossacks, whichever version of these you want to take inspiration from, except make them big and evil and worshipping the dark gods.
Yeah, right. They're very. I mean, if we look back at the GW of the 80s, 90s, they're going to be very stereotypical steppe horse culture, right? And then here they're working with them and putting them into chaos.
I mean, if you imagine the Kurgan out of the Highlander films, that's the sort of theme they're going with here.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, the Kislevites are very similar in the sense that they're steppe people and that they have influences, whether it's Ukrainian or Hungarian or Eastern European kind of, but also kind of, Crimean or Caucasian or Caucasus Asian type peoples.
I mean, they've got winged lancers. You think very much of this Poland, Lithuania type of system. They've got boyars. So it's this mix of Eastern Slavic cultures and cultural stereotypes in some cases that this book then draws upon, but fleshes out more in their own unique ways. So yeah, Kislev is definitely Eastern Slavic steppe, but more settled steppe, less nomadic steppe than the steppe nomads and the ones from maybe Mongolia or like that. In the Warhammer world, Kislev is that Eastern,
and they're the good guy version.
Yeah, absolutely.
if we go back in sort of Warhammer lore, the history side of it, the Kislevites, or the Gospodar part of Kislev culture, came over the World's Edge Mountains, having done a huge exodus from what would now be Mongolia, so sort of hobgoblin steppe country, into what is now Kislev, about 1,000 years before the present. Conquered this from the Unggols, and who had in turn been conquering it from the Ropesmen, and created this state while the Empire was in turmoil in the time of the Three Emperors, so the Old World time. And we know from some of the reveals from the Old World that in the Old World, Kislev is going to extend part the way back there, so across the top of the Darklands, the Great Skull Lands, all the way to the edge of the steppes. So,
okay.
And the book doesn't really touch on it very much, but the people of Kislev worship the god Ursun, so they don't worship Sigmar or Ulrich very much. They're more associated with Ursun, and you see this in the Ambassador and Ursun's Teeth. Ursun's Teeth is a geographical feature, if I recall correctly, in Kislev that is associated with the god. And so the book doesn't really touch on religion very much, but just to be clear to everyone, they are not followers of Sigmar.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good. All right. Okay, everyone. Well, we've done the spoiler-free section of our book review. We are going to be moving into the Drachwald. It's very dangerous in here. So this is the spoiler section. So if you are planning on reading the book and don't want to know what happens in it, you probably shouldn't listen. But if you just want to know what happens because it sounds so interesting, join us in the Drachwald. So who wants to introduce us to our characters? Who do we have? What's going on?
Kerry's going to talk about a lot of other stuff, so I think I can handle the Gerlach and the Carl. Okay. So what we're first introduced into the book, we meet our titular characters, Gerlach Helaman and Carl Rainer Volin, and Gerlach's 22, and Carl is 20 years old, and they are a troop of demilancers who are mounted cavalrymen who kind of wear light armor. They're equipped with a lance and a pair of pistols or a short rifle, all utilizing basically wheel-lock technology, 16th century firearms, and they're meant to be similar to pistoliers in the game Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And they're kind of elite shock troops. They're the young sons of landed nobles or people who are otherwise able to afford entry into the troop
or sometimes barely able to afford.
Yeah. In this time and place, it's going to be expected that you're going to supply your own equipment basically and pay for yourself unless you have a sponsor. So affording a horse, affording the armor and the weapons, and maintaining your ability to do that is an expensive endeavor. And so you're going to have to figure out a way to do that. And Carl is the unit's musician, and Gerlach is the unit's standard bearer, basically. And Gerlach and Carl's relationship is framed around the fact that Gerlach is the son of a famous knight. He's entitled, or his father's entitled. He's a sworn knight of an order that escapes me at the moment, and he has an older brother who's also a spurred knight in that order. And Gerlach is on the fast track to become a knight in the order.
And Gerlach knows it. Like, Gerlach knows he's a big deal. He's annoying.
Yeah, Gerlach, when you first meet him, he's 22 years old, and he is very arrogant. He's very pompous. He's xenophobic. Brash. All of these kind of negative qualities you associate with the rich and powerful and young and arrogant. And Carl is his younger person associated with him who doesn't have the same family pedigree and is more studious, more interested in education, more interested in being a well-rounded person and is kind of more thoughtful and empathetic. And
Right. They go to a city, Choika, and when they get there, this kind of plays out that Carl he knows where they are when the leader of their unit, Trook, asks them about stuff. He knows where they are. He knows the river. He knows the town, and he even knows the language and can talk to the people in Choika, even though Gerlach, who is wealthier and all this more established, doesn't. And so that's kind of how that shows up.
It's
Sorry,
pretty
yeah.
implied. It's pretty implied that Gerlach can't read that well.
Right.
And the technical name the book uses for Standard Bearer is Vexillary, which is Gerlach's position in the troop. And we're introduced to a number of the guys in the troop. It's led by Meinhard Stauer, who's considered the old man at 32 years old. And so what the idea you get is this is a group of really young guys, and they're from Talabheim. And Helaman is going to be spurred into the Knightly Order of the Red Shield, which isn't really a order that is well known from the army books or the big rule book or anything. It doesn't have a prominent place in Warhammer Fantasy Battle lore.
Certainly something someone could, if they wanted to make an army list, would be pretty cool. They could make their own.
It's the bodyguard Knightly Order unit for the Count of Talabheim. That's all we've got.
So if you've got a Talabheim army, there you go.
So Carl comes from a position where his family had fallen on hard times. They're kind of it's noble. He has noble lineage dating back to Saarland, the Lost Province, and he's basically a cousin of Gerlach Helaman, and is kind of the whipping boy stepchild kind of guy who's allowed to live there and be educated and enjoy, that privilege, but is also not going to be part of, the main family and going to become a knight and become rich and inherit land.
And just as an aside on pronunciations, we always reserve the right to butcher the pronunciations of any of these groups because we reserve that right. I'm going to go with Heilemann, I think, because in German it's the second vowel that's pronounced. But we're all gonna, deal with some words that we don't know. So forgive us for any pronunciations.
Yeah, please forgive me for mispronunciations. What we learned pretty early on is that Carl and Gerlach do not like each other. They have a noted distaste for each other. Growing up, being in the unit, they do not get along, and you are sympathetic with Carl because Gerlach is just a pompous ass, and he's basically a xenophobic, arrogant.
He spits on him once, right? They're going across a bridge. Is it a bridge that they're going across that he decides to let loose a loogie and just
into the wind?
Carl with it.
I don't recall, but it seems very on point.
Yeah, he spits into the wind and it blows back onto Carl's armor, and Carl's like, "I'm gonna let it go. Right.
And also to get a taste for the unit they're in, the demilancers, basically nobody in this unit has ever experienced any type of war or combat except some of the older guys have been in some border disputes and skirmishes and stuff, but nothing.
But they're all excited. They're all very
full-fledged war.
And the army that they're joining, it's not what you'd normally see on the tabletop in terms of provincial theme. Every unit or little group of units is from a different province. So we've got pikemen from Weissenland, some pike and archers from Nordland, cannon from Nuln, we've got Avalanders, we've got these demilancers coming in from Talabheim. It feels a lot more organic than being up in the northern marches with your Reichland army. This feels like we've got contingents from across the empire, and this is an empire army, not just one province.
Yeah, so after we're introduced to the two characters, I guess the next thing to point out is what's going on here is this Demilancer unit is marching north and east to go towards Kislev to assemble with a rest of an Imperial army in a town called Zavedka.
Right.
I'm not sure if pronunciation is correct, but that's where the first couple chapters is taking us.
Yeah.
These demilancers are marching north and east. They're headed towards the war. They're headed towards to meet the Chaos invasion that's coming through Kislev.
And it's pretty clear that that Hyland doesn't care about other people. I mean, they get to Troika, and he's demanding food that the peasants very clearly don't have. Other units have come through, and he wants all their food, and he's upset that they won't give it to him. And Carl's trying to kind of get him to understand that it doesn't exist, or that there's very little, and if they take their food, they're not going to have anything. I mean, that's just kind of who Gerlach is. He doesn't care about other people, and he's super self-confident.
Yeah, just the logistical considerations of warfare is you have a lot of soldiers moving towards this area of the country or this area of the world, and they're picking the countryside clean. A lot of them are marching on the same routes, and the units that come before them are going to eat up all the food. So the peasants are going to basically starve, and that you can pay them all the money you want, and the peasants show them that they've been paid a ton of money, but at the end of the day, you still need food to eat. And there's just the countryside's getting picked clean.
Yeah.
So we get, and then we're going to meet some Kislevite cavalry.
Yeah. They meet.
Who do not make a good first impression with Gerlach.
No, Gerlach charges them, right?
Yeah, they look scruffy. They must be evil.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, so Gerlach and Carl are told to ride ahead about a half day's ride to where the Imperial army is meeting, and Carl and Gerlach and two other guys go to do that, and on their way there, they run into these Kislevites.
Like, Gerlach charging this Kislevite winged lancer unit is just absurd. He's like, there's 4 guys. Everybody come with me. Let's charge. And Carl's trying to hold him back and say, hey, why are we charging these guys? This is dumb. Let's not do this. And yet here he goes, because he wants glory, and everyone here is a bad guy, and I'm in charge, and you can't tell me to stop. I mean, that's kind of his attitude.
Yeah, the Kislevites are coming across are very much not in their war glory. They're on small looking ponies, and they're wearing, rags and furs, and, you couldn't really decipher that they are, good soldiers or allies to the Imperials.
They seem sort of bemused by the whole thing. Like, what on earth's going on?
Yeah, they're not worried about it. They're not worried about him.
There's like 4 pistoliers charging us. We've still got winged lancer stats. What are you going to do?
Right.
Yeah, Beledny, who's the leader of these guys, he's very wise to the world, and he just thinks this is, silly and humorous, right? It's like one of those things where if the guy was charging you with a lance, he'd just step aside and bonk you on the head with the flat of his saber type of thing.
I can't remember exactly what the conversation is between them, but eventually when they figure out, okay, he shouldn't be charging them, and Carl kind of starts talking to the Kislevites because inevitably he's the only one who speaks their language. He starts talking to them and trying to settle things down, and Heilemann is getting upset and making these demands about apologies and all this stuff, this formal recognition. And Beledny says, okay, and he kind of works it out with Carl, but then he asks Carl if Heilemann is Webla, and he calls him Webla, and all the men in the Kislevite unit laugh when he calls Heilemann a Webla, and Heilemann gets upset because he's like, oh, they're laughing at me. What does that mean? And Carl just says, well, I don't know what it means.
Well, Carl doesn't actually speak Kislev.
He doesn't?
No, he doesn't speak.
I thought he had. Oh, no. Or was it just that he understood some of what they were saying? Because I remember he's the one.
Better ability. I think he has a better ability with language, but he's not like he's fluent or anything.
He's willing to listen to their Reichsspiel.
Right. They're able to communicate with broken language, but Carl might not know what Webla means at that time either. He's not a native. He's not a fluent or native.
Right. He's not hiding that he something, but he just doesn't know it. Okay, that makes sense. But
Gerlach is very insulting at this time, and Beledny is, pretty much worldly wise and good natured, and he doesn't let Gerlach's insults get to him. He's just he's pretty cool about it.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. So they go and meet Marshal Nebo. Anything happened there?
they find the marshal in charge of the army, really circling the drain in terms of his own morale. He's drinking constantly, and
his adjutant's doing everything, right? Like he's the one running stuff.
yeah, and it's very much the sky is falling. I need all the troops here now. I've got a chaos horde on the other side of the forest, like 4 miles away. What do you mean you're not going to be here till morning? No, now, get your soldiers here now. It's kicking off.
There's this weird moment where he's like, "What? You were given orders to show up by noon tomorrow. You need to be here now because the enemy's going to be here in 2 days." Right? Like he has this everything's about to happen, but doesn't he say something about like we have 2 days before the battle?
Yeah, but bear in mind that the battle might be in 2 days, but that isn't the pre-battle skirmishes. That isn't the manoeuvring. You want to get your light cavalry in position now. That's fair enough.
Right. Yeah. So he's he thinks there's going to be a battle in a few days, but he wants his troops there to be ready and to get ready to fight. And he's worried.
Yeah,
and drunk.
Just to give people some scale, the book talks about there being about 6,000 Imperials in this town, plus Kislevite allies. And so you have pikemen, crossbowmen, artillery, Knights Panther, handgunners, demilancers and people from all types of provinces: Wissenland, Averland, Nordland, Talabheim. And when we're talking about Marshal Niebuhr here, you're about 25 pages in, and this is where you really start to get a sense of foreboding and a sense of like a storm cloud kind of starting to hang over events. Like Niebuhr is incompetent.
This isn't going to be a happy book, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you're starting to get the sense that the dark clouds are kind of circling over this Zavedka, or however you pronounce it.
Yeah,
and there's a darkness that's kind of starting to enclose our characters.
How can there be danger? They've got dogs of war with them.
Wait, what dogs of war do they have? And I'm going to blame the dogs of war for any possible future defeats.
So they have a dogs of war contingent that is mentioned as being with them. There's also an offhand mention of Battonian cavalry quite early on, but it's not explicitly within this army. They've just been sent north.
Gotcha. Okay, so he tells them, get up here as quick as you can. And so they go back to the unit and say, hey, we need to get up there now. And so they start moving. What's next?
So, well, they set off at sort of midnight. It's just about heading towards dawn when they get back to the muster with the unit. And the captain says to Gerlach, right, you take the men over to what we've been told is the mustering point for us. I'm going to take the one guy who can read maps and go back to the marshal and say we're here.
Right. So a small contingent goes with him and Carl, and
like four,
and then Gerlach
four guys
takes the main
total?
unit. Yeah.
Stour, the company commander, Carl, Johann Friedel, and Anmeyer.
Yeah. And now we're going to pull back to this third-person perspective I referenced earlier, where it says, so, the massacre at Zavedka. This is the course of events leading up to it all going wrong. And this is the person, and what it means narratively is that they can jump around a few different perspectives. I mean, if you've read any sort of like Harry Turtledove or Game of Thrones, you know the style of jumping from unimportant soldier A when it's just about to all go wrong, and unimportant soldier A is about to get shot in the head. And that this narrative device Abnett uses lets him do that for just this one scene where it's needed.
Well,
so
I also think this is it's helpful in the sense that you talked earlier about this being a book that could introduce people to all the stuff and you didn't necessarily have to read anything. This is one of the reasons why is it tells the story of these two guys, but occasionally it's going to pull back and say, and here's what's going on in the broader sense. And really it's like 2 pages and then it jumps back in.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it does function really well as an intro book.
I would just point out this is about 30 pages into the book, and this is the last moment we see Carl and Gerlach together. So from this point on, Carl and Gerlach are not going to be seen together for a long time.
Good addition there with that last couple words.
So what happened in, I suppose, tabletop terms is that the entire Chaos Army learned to Vanguard and then got the first turn as well.
Yeah, Abnett even writes like, it's really uncommon in large armies and battles for one army to completely surprise the other army. But hey, that's what happened here.
And harkening back to what we were talking about in what we've been up to in the hobby, this has a very much a feeling of Isandawana about it, in that, there's 20,000 guys that are just like 2 minutes away, and they're all over us now.
Well, not to, make this about the United States, but to make this about the United States, this would be the Battle of Shiloh, when the massive Confederate army surprises the Union army that's encamped at the Shiloh landing.
I'd go you one better. This actually feels quite San Jacinto, in that they're just going to run at us and overwhelm us in seconds.
You're going to out-American me? You're going to go Texas on me?
Yeah,
is that what just happened? I got out-Texased?
That's what happened. After last time, I planned what my American equivalent was going to be.
He's been reading our Wikipedia pages.
Kerry, you're my hero. You are my hero. Okay, so they've been surprised. This massive army comes out and surprises this Imperial / Kislevite contingent army, and
they just start worldly wise Kislevites would be better with regards to surprise. I could see the Imperials getting surprised, but you'd think the Kislevites would have like smell it in the air type of thing.
We don't see that much of what the Kislevites are doing and how many they lose. We mainly see the Imperials getting massacred, a few of them getting into formation. But the thing is, if all of the Imperial officers have a bit of Gerlach in them and don't actually listen to the scraggy Kislevites because they've not put their posh armor on yet, it doesn't matter how much they see this coming.
Yeah,
I think the implication from the story is that the Kislevites definitely fare better with regards to casualties. I mean, it's not great, but it's also still not.
Well, I mean,
the 95%.
Yeah, let's look. Let's just talk for a moment about what happens to Gerlach and the contingent of the demilancers. How many of them survive their first meeting with the chaos, with the Kurgan? It's 3. Is it 3? 4? I think it's 3.
Only Demeter and Lincer, I think,
and Gerlach, yeah.
And Gerlach, yeah. I think it's only 3 of them.
So
after the Battle of Zabedka,
and we'll talk about some Kislevites that survived, but certainly a much larger percentage of the Kislevites that are fighting survived than and 3 of the unit.
Some of the Imperials do survive. We're going to see that some of them gathered up and reconstituted later. Just sort of like bits of all these separate units shoved together as a new formation, and there are some, and even more of them are actually going to wander out of this book and pop up again in the Ambassador Chronicles, camped outside Kislev City, being quite demoralized about having had their army destroyed, and then are going to become relevant again.
That's a hell of an obscure reference. To remember reading the Ambassador and then also remembering that some units from this book show up in the Ambassador. That's dedication to the podcast.
It's almost like I've been through all these books, the fine-tooth comb, to write a supplement of these battles. Yeah.
There you go.
But I would just stop and say that I think this battle scene that we get here is very well written. I mean, you've read a lot of Black Library books, a lot of battle scenes.
I mean, we mentioned in Heldenhammer how the battle scenes felt, right?
Yeah, the Heldenhammer battle scenes were battle scenes, but the writing here, the real sense of surprise, the real sense of units that are disorganized trying to form and put up a resistance, and real visuals with regards to kind of the slaughter that takes place, and guys half dressed in half formation, just being subject to this surprise attack and this ambush, and it's really well written.
I wrote to the side of this, I just wrote really evocative battle description. And that's going to be throughout the book. Abnett is just able to describe these battles with a personal sense. So he'll talk about what individuals in these battles are doing. And yet at the same time, he's able to, through discussing what they see, give you a sense of what's happening overall in the battle. And he just is able to use all the senses to, well, maybe not all the senses, but he's able to describe in the most evocative way what's happening. And it's truly well written battle sequences. And they're not super long where you get bored of them. They're quick and punchy and really powerful.
The other thing is the depth of detail Abnett goes into with some of the items involved in terms of, sort of like weapons and armor typology. You're not just getting a sword, you're getting a palaz. And you can go and look up what that is and have a look at the number of fulas and things he describes in it.
It's well researched.
And it even extends to the horses. Horses are going to be a big theme within the novel. Not a massive theme, but they're going to keep coming back in. And again, this feels like he knows what he's talking about.
Yep. At another point, I wrote a note talking about how it's very clear that he has done research or has looked into differences in horse culture and in horses in general. It's, again, really well done.
Yeah, so with relations to our two main characters, Gerlach and Karl, the Battle of Zavedka, you see Karl with Stour and two other demilancers going to the headquarters right basically as the ambush surprise attack is starting to come through the Imperial camp. And so Karl finds himself at the headquarters, and his companions are killed, and he's fighting with the bodyguard of the marshal, and he sees that the Imperial marshal has been killed by an assassin.
They yell at him to protect the Imperial marshal, and he goes into the room, and the marshal's dead, and he's like, "Oh, hey, he didn't die by suicide. What must that mean if he's in this locked room?"
So we see Karl's there, and he's at the Imperial headquarters, and he basically gets in one-on-one combat with the assassin of the marshal. And
well, actually, 2-on-1. He fights. There's a guy with is it antler helms that jumps at him, kind of nakedish, bare-chested looking guy with knives that jumps at him, and he slashes at him and hits him away, and then he tries to leave the room, and that's when he gets sees this other guy.
And he'd run into this other guy in a big sort of metal wolf helmet before, and managed to get a stab in on his shoulder and get past him. But this is very much the musician of a Pistoliers unit is now having round 2 in a challenge with an exalted hero of chaos. It's not going to go well for him.
Right. He really doesn't get to do. He just opens the door and the guy's there and acts to face or acts to something.
It's higher initiative. What do you expect?
And at the end of it, we're kind of left in suspense as to the fate of Karl. It seems like he's just been killed, but we don't really know. He's been put out of commission, though, for sure. And then we transition to what Gerlach's doing during the Battle of Zavedka. And what Gerlach's doing is he's leading the troop of demilancers into battle quite bravely.
And briefly.
And they are routed just as well as most of the rest of the Imperial army, even though they are able to get into formation and to provide some level of effective resistance. They're still inexperienced. They're still vastly outnumbered and in a bad tactical position.
Yeah. They get beat pretty badly, pretty soundly. They all kind of flee. I think they flee kind of in different directions, but ultimately, Heilemann is able to, or meets up with a couple others, I think 2 others, as he's fleeing from the Chaos armies but he discovers, or he realizes, that he's being I don't know what, surrounded. I guess he's being chased and pushed into smaller and smaller box. And then as he's getting pushed into the smaller box, uh, hunted like a fox, he meets the other three, and they decide to charge a small unit of warriors to be able to break out of this trap and hopefully survive.
I believe what happened was they saw the unit standard had been taken.
Well, I think they get a little bit away first before they find out that the unit standard, there's this hope of escape, and then Heilemann sees the unit standard being carried by 5 warriors, and he's like, "Well, we have to go get it." And the other 2 look at him, and the one who's wounded, likely dying, his guts are, well, definitely dying, his guts are hanging out, says, "Yeah, we should definitely go get it." And the other one says, "Okay, I'm going to do it before I get smart and don't go with you." And so then the 3 of them go after the unit standard. And I think that's kind of the event. And so they go to try to get the unit standard.
Right. So they're those 3 are on a quote unquote suicide mission. They don't think they're going to actually be successful, but kind of unit pride and the fact that the standard is Gerlach's responsibility kind of, compels them to attempt the act of getting their colors back.
Right. Enter Beledny.
Yeah, enter our scruffy Kislevites who we met a little bit earlier in the book.
But they don't look so scruffy anymore, do they? No nerf herders.
Yeah, this is our real first introduction into Beledny and the Yechtich Krug. This is the name of the town where these unit of winged lancers, of Kislevite winged lancers, hail from. And they see the courage of Gerlach and the other 2 lancers, and they say this is a thing that is noble, and we should try to help save these guys if we can.
So they go in and break them. I guess stop the 5 guys that they're fighting, and they start fighting them. But then as they're fighting, as they come in, now more chaos guys that had been hunting those 3 start showing up, and it threatens to overwhelm the Kislevites.
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they're successful in keeping the demilancer standard.
That's no, the one of them that was not holding his guts in and wasn't Gerlach ends up with it and then gets shot just as they get to the tree line. And it's like, Gerlach's opinion is, well, that was for nothing then, wasn't it?
Right. But what he does see is that as they're riding, he loses his horse, and he's on the ground, and he, the warriors are coming, and he sees the Kislevite banner guy had been shot, and so he had lost his banner, and he grabs the Kislevite banner, and this leads Beledny to bring Gerlach's horse and rescue Gerlach. So he does get a banner, but it's the Kislevite winged lancer banner rather than his own banner.
And this gives Gerlach the opportunity to escape the slaughter as Zedevka and ride off with the winged lancers, while our opposite number Karl is in a bad situation near the Imperial headquarters. We're not quite sure what happened to him.
Right. Well, and that actually jumps us. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Karl's about to wake up in a cage made of pikes with a load of corpses, dying people, and other prisoners of interest.
Yeah, I love how in this section he's like, it goes from him, like, as he's waking up, he looks around and it doesn't seem like anyone else is alive. Like, it's just a bunch of corpses in this pike jail. And, then he meets, Drogo Hans, who ends up having a knife somehow that, they hadn't discovered, and he has a knife and he's trying to kill himself, and Karl stops him from killing himself. And then they also meet von Marger, who's a knight. Anyone want to talk about von Marger?
So he's someone that in universe Karl has heard of as a great knightly hero of the Empire, and he's he actually pulls himself out of having this little squee hero worship moment in the middle of all these corpses.
Yeah, but Von
Mark,
Marker is blind. He's been blinded.
yeah, he's been.
Van Marger is a famous Knights Panther from that time. I think he's from Altdorf.
So he's been hit on the head, and it's caused some internal injuries, and it seems like his optic nerve's been severed just from blunt force trauma, which is quite horrific. So his eyes are sort of rolling in his head, not seeing anything. But he's able to. Well, let's just say it seems like he's able to read thoughts, and we're getting hints of that now.
He knows things. He's able to discern what's going on in spite of not being able to see.
And at this time, very early in his captivity, Carl is still a proud Imperial soldier, and he'll tell his fellow captives, hey, we're proud Imperial soldiers. We can't kill ourselves. We have to have Imperial discipline and kind of Imperial integrity, and we're better than chaos.
Yeah, he's trying to. That's why he saves Drago Hance, and Drago Hance is upset about that. We also get our introduction into some of these chaos guys because so Tsar Olden comes up and he does something to Carl on his cheek, right?
It already
happened.
Yeah. Okay. So we meet Wolf's Head guy again, and this is introduced as Tsar Ulden. Tsar is the title, so we think of that as captain or hero.
Right.
We find out that while Carl was unconscious, having been whacked with the flat of an axe, he'd been tattooed on his cheek, and so Alden's got dibs on Carl out of these people in the cage, and he's done it. All of the heroes have dibsed some of these prisoners.
Right, and on the guy who had the antlers, the kind of nakedy one, the bare-chested one, the guy that we'll come to know as Ons Olker, he tries to connect himself to Carl in some way. He starts talking to Carl, and Carl rejects whatever he says, and Ons Olker cuts himself and then throws the blood at Carl and calls him Blood Tide.
I believe Ons Olker is mad at Carl because he's bested him in single combat, and it's a wound to his pride. And Ons Olker basically wants to kill Carl to, recover from that incident.
Right.
Whereas the Tsar, who's in charge of Carl now, is going to make him his slave. And so there's a natural tension between Ons Olker wants to kill him, but this guy has a valuable slave in his eyes, and he doesn't want him to be killed.
Yeah, we'll see that tension come out.
Ons Olker's the shaman for Tsar Blader, who's a rival to Tsar Ulden. This is going to get really confusing for people, isn't it?
It does.
Blader is a Kornate warband leader, though they don't really clarify this for another 300 odd pages.
And they don't play it up either. Even people that end up in his band later are still Tzeentch guys, even though Bleda is Khorne.
And it's worth harking back to this is written in 6th edition, where it really was pushing you towards an undivided Chaos Warriors army, so you could have all the different factions in there rather than it being mono god being more effective.
Yeah, this is where we're first introduced to kind of the concept that this Chaos army that has just won the Battle of Zvedka is actually is composed of separate war bands who soldiers are associated with individual leaders, and they come together to fight as a loose coalition of chaos and make an army. So you have Tsar Bleda, and then you have 3 or 4 other czars like Tsar Uldin, or will be introduced to other czars, and they are
associated later that will be big czars of czars.
So Tsar Ulding has a war band that Carl's associated with now as a slave, and then Tsar Bleda has a war band, and Tsar Bleda might be associated with Nurgle, but Tsar Ulding might be associated with Tzeentch, and then different czars are going to be associated with different gods, and they're going to have their own war bands who are going to have their own slaves, and they're rivals, and they're only going to come together to fight together against their greater enemy, which is the Imperials.
Right. Yeah. And you see, one thing that I liked is they talk about this. So at one point they get a bunch of captives and they're taking them out. And these are men that maybe haven't been marked, because as soon as they see that Carl has been marked, they don't take him. But they take some of the men, including Drago Hance, who is really mad at Carl that Carl didn't let him kill himself, because they take him out and they behead him. I guess he thought that was worse than taking his own life. And he's beheaded. But they take all these skulls from a bunch of captives that they end up killing, plus the skulls of those who had, the Imperials and I guess Kislevites as well, who died in the battle. And they take them and they put them in fire pits and they burn them so that there's just the skulls. So they take the heads, they burn them, just the skulls. And then all these czars start having their men make squares of skulls, say, I don't know, 10 by 10 or 20 by 20. I don't think it mentions exactly how many. And then, after the 20 by 20, then they're going to make ultimately a pyramid of skulls. And if they can make a pyramid of skulls, if they have enough skulls of men that they and their followers have killed, then they get to take one last person, kill them at the top of this pyramid of skulls, or spread the blood of that person at this pyramid of skulls. And then Tsar Olden, and the others will get a mark on their face, a cut on their face to mark that they have created this pyramid. So it's this kind of symbol that they and their men have killed enough to make a pyramid. And I thought that was a really interesting depiction.
Yeah, and around now we're introduced to kind of the slave culture of chaos and the nature of it that you find in the lore, and the concept, if you're an Imperial, that you have this idea that, save the last bullet for yourself type of situation, because any type of captivity is going to result in a fate far worse than death. And so that's why you would see someone like Drogo trying to kill himself. The endless possibilities of torture via the followers of chaos,
right,
or transformation into some sort of grotesque and hideous amalgamation, or something that represents life but is really just eternal suffering.
Right.
So the idea that you can take yourself out and control your own destiny is preferable to whatever chaos is going to do to you.
Yeah, because presumably because he's part of this stack of skulls that got taken out, I don't know, I guess demons get him. I don't know what's happening in the afterlife because of this, but I would presume that it's not as good as if he took his own life, that he was part of this stack of skulls.
I'm not sure what Sigmar's philosophy on suicide is.
Also a good point. But anyway, certainly you don't want to be on this one of the skulls in this stack of skulls. And Tsar Olden wants you to be one, and he gets. Is this his third mark? No, it's his fourth mark on that side of his face. Is that correct? Something like that. Anyway, so that's what we have. And then I think the last thing that we see in this little section about Carl is Von Marger is talking to him and seems to have had some sort of vision, because he starts talking to Carl and says, "Hey, you're going to kill me, and you're also going to kill Tsar Olden. Or you're going to make the fifth scratch on his right side or left side, whichever side didn't have as many. One of these pyramid scratches. You're going to make the fifth scratch on him, and you're going to kill him." So Von Marger's very clearly seeing things that he shouldn't, as a good Imperial soldier, see, and he tells Carl about some of them.
Yeah, and this is a point in the novel where we're going back and forth now, chapter to chapter, between Carl and Gerlach. And at the end of this chapter, first chapter where Carl's in captivity, his fate is still very much in the air. He's seeing people around him murdered and sacrificed, and he's still a relative nobody, and we have no idea what's going to happen to him.
Oh, and part of that is that he got the knife. He got Drago's blade. So that
has a name.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What is it? I forget.
True Killer.
He gets True Killer from Drago. So he is planning his escape. And Von Marger actually at some point said, "Hey, I know you're not noble enough to become a knight. But if you help me escape and you get me to safety, I can make that dream come true for you. And so I think this sets up the story for Carl to work to escape, because it's going to be his way out of this situation where he's not a nobody, but he doesn't have a big future in the Empire. And so this is his opportunity. If he can escape with von Marger and with the whatever the true killer, through using the true killer, then he has this chance. So at least for me, I was like, oh, okay. So this is how he's gonna escape. He's gonna use this knife. He's gonna get von Marger out, and that's gonna be his opportunity to be a true knight, where someone like Gerlach is too arrogant to really be a good knight.
Yeah, it's going to be tough with a completely blind person trying to escape in the middle of a Chaos army. Sounds very difficult.
It does, but I don't know. For the rest of you, is that what you were thinking? Like, as you read this, you're going, hey, okay, so this is why this is the challenge of escape. It's not just himself. He's got to do this with someone else.
I read this first when it came out. So when I reread it for the podcast, I already knew the story.
Okay, I want you to imagine little Mike. What did little Mike think?
I was honestly probably like 12 years old when I read this.
Okay, well, fine. We'll see it. I'll be the newbie that we see it through my newbie eyes.
I read it when I was 13, so I do remember thinking, okay, how are these two characters going to get back together again? That's how narratives work, isn't it? So, right. We're collecting this group of unlikely heroes along the way, and they'll team up and do something. And that is not how it's going.
It even says, like, Abnett kind of foreshadows something, and I don't remember exactly where it is, but he foreshadows this idea of these two are going to have very different paths. Oh, yeah. Okay, so at one point, this is going back when they're in Troika, it says, a world of difference existed between them, and it was about to get much wider. So he's already told us, like, this is going to be the story of these two men and their differences. And I'm expecting their differences to come out in how they're going to react to the same thing. But very clearly, they're in different circumstances. And that's a really cool aspect of this story, is it's not how they react to the same thing. They're reacting to very different things. So I guess that leads us to Carl's still imprisoned. People are dying all around him. What's Gerlach doing?
He's learning he was not as good a horseman as he thought he was.
He's getting left behind.
He's getting left behind a bit. The fellow who didn't get shot in the back from the demilancer unit but did have his guts hanging out has now passed away. He's now having to lead that horse as well, and keeps falling back behind. And
but he also doesn't want to be with them. He just doesn't like them, right? He doesn't like the Kislevites, so he doesn't really want to talk to them or be with them.
And the Kislevites, who are sort of trying to hurry him up and also trying to be friendly, don't speak very good Reichsspiel or speak no Reichsspiel, and this is bothering him even more.
Right, because everyone should speak what he speaks.
Yeah, unlike Karl, who, as of this point, it seems like the Kurgans all speak perfect Reichsspiel, almost like they had like forced classes to make sure they could do the language before they invaded.
Right. Yeah, which we'll get back to. I noticed later, or I noticed at one point, I was like, okay, this is frustrating. But we'll talk more about that later. So he's kind of slowed down, but doesn't care. He's willing to let himself get left behind by the Winged Lancers, but the Winged Lancers are coming back to see him. One named Vitali goes back to see him, and they're trying to get him to speed up, but then they notice something behind him. There's some Chiazza back there, which are just raiders. So Vitali says, I'll go deal with these guys. Y'all get the rest of the Winged Lancers. And he goes back, and they're supposed to get the Winged Lancers. But after, a very short period of time, Gerlach realizes they're too far away. They're not going to be able to get the winged lancers in time. And he sends the young boy with them to go get the winged lancers. And he goes back to help Vitali.
Yeah, reading between the lines there, maybe not even reading between the lines at all, it's kind of basically Gerlach's fault that Vitali is put in a position of mortal danger. Because if Gerlach wasn't falling behind so badly from the rest of the group, then Vitali wouldn't have to be in a position where he'd have to confront these raiders who are coming up on their trail.
But bear in mind,
so Gerlach then goes to help Vitali.
But bear in mind, they did have a rear guard that appears to have all been massacred as well. They had a few guys much further back than Gerlach who are now
really. I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, they weren't relying on the sort of sullen Imperial to keep an eye on their rear. So there were a couple
Okay,
of there were a few guys on rotation much further back, and the fact that the raiders have got through means they're dead.
Okay, so Gerlach goes back. Vitali is fighting. Gerlach surprises some of these warriors, and then it's still looking bad because there were more than Gerlach could deal with, and that's when Beledny and the others show up, and they ride in and save both Gerlach and Vitali, and Beledna fights the leader of these Chaos Warriors and defeats him.
Yeah, Beledny is the first time we see kind of Beledny take anyone on in personal combat, and that's where you kind of see why he's the leader of this unit, that he has tremendous personal courage and fighting ability, and can defeat a chaos leader one-on-one.
And then the Kislevites go around the corpses putting out all their eyes, which Gerlach is horrified. So, why are you doing that? And it's, well, when their spirits come back, we don't want them able to find us and take revenge. And
I love it.
And you should never tell something like that to the posh European guy who's well out of his depth, because he gets nightmares now. You've given him nightmares. Well done.
I love these are going to be tidbits. Dan Abnett does an amazing job of throwing cultural tidbits throughout the book, instead of having it be descriptive of, and they do this because this. He lets things develop, and in each chapter where you're seeing it from Gerlach or Carl's point of view, you get little snippets, and these little snippets show up later, and he just does a great job of showing them at the right time. So I really liked that.
I always think it's interesting when you're reading a book like this and you've played Warhammer for a lot of years, and you know the composition of Warhammer armies on the tabletop, and like what a regular Empire unit champion or hero can do against anything basically in the Warriors of Chaos book. It's basically going to be certain death, and you get these Empire type characters doing marvelous things in the lore sometimes, and it's just like, yeah, on the tabletop that is mathematically very extreme.
That's where fate comes in.
We're 6th edition. He's got the fusillade rule. He can run in and potentially shoot 2 guys and then attack.
That's right. That's a good point.
Yeah, but Beledny doesn't have a pistol.
Oh, he's like a captain of Kislev, though, isn't he? Wouldn't you?
A captain of Kislev, I mean, a Boyar's stats probably are, pretty maybe in line with a warrior's stats, I guess.
Yeah, but a Kislev Boyar could take a warrior in 6th.
So, then, of course, because Heilemann is who he is, he gets upset because the next morning he wakes up. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Before that.
Wait. You've forgotten the bit where one of the Kislevites, the one who can speak perfect Reichspiel, can also magically talk to horses.
Well, yeah.
And never gets mentioned again. Because he knows the name of Gerlach's horse and mentions it offhand in conversation. And Gerlach's like, how did you know that? I'm not going to. I'm out of. I've had too many things going on today. I'm not going to chase up on this. I never will.
So, is that the only magic-y thing that the Kislev do in this book? I think it is.
We don't even establish that it's magic. It might be something that Gerlach has mentioned.
Yeah. So Gerlach goes to sleep, wakes up, and they wake him up and say, hey, we're sending Demeter, his body, out on horseback with these other dead who've died in battle. and we're going to send him out. And they put his body on a horse and send it out. And he gets really mad because that's not the way Imperials do it. And then Beledny says that they're going to go a different direction than Gerlach wants. Gerlach wants them to go directly at where the enemy will be going. Go west because that's where the Empire is and that's where the enemy is, and go that way. And he calls Beledny a coward because Beledny won't go directly west and keeps saying we're going to go a different direction. And they have a fight. Beledny hits him in the face. Gerlach fights him. They have this, conflict. And ultimately, Beledny's Beledny's grabbing his neck, or who's grabbing whose neck? I can't remember.
Beledny's grabbing Gerlach's on top and seems to be winning, but then Beledny just sort of puts a hand out, grabs his throat, and it's, I could just crush your larynx now.
Oh,
Stop.
That's right.
That's
right. So he stops him and says, like, hey, when two guys fight with a spear and one dude's spear breaks, the guy with the broken spear, where does he attack from, the front or the back? And ultimately, of course, the guy with the broken spear needs to attack from the back because he can't get close enough in the front. And that's what he's trying to say is, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to attack Chaos from the back. And so they are going to go to Dushika, which is the town where Beledny wants to go.
And this is the watershed character moment for Gerlach, where he realizes that just riding at things, shouting and waving a lance isn't going to solve everything. There actually needs to be some thought into this.
Right. Yeah.
Beledny hammers this home by, sort of more or less cracking his jaw open.
Right.
Yeah, and this is still a point in the book where Gerlach is still very much xenophobic and kind of thinks less of, steppe people and their culture and a steppe burial, which, you see Demeter get a steppe burial, which is a big honor for a warrior in their culture. And
he's like, it's dishonorable. That's not how you bury people.
Yeah, but that's something that we're still in that stage of Gerlach being a brash, arrogant jerk.
Absolutely. So then we go back and we see Carl in the prisoner pits, and the prisoners are being split up. Von Margus goes to Tsar Bleda, and Karl Volin goes to Tsar Uldin. And this is in spite of who's the guy that wants Karl, wants to kill him?
Onzolker.
Yeah, Onzolker. He tries to get him again, and Tsar Uldin doesn't let him.
Yeah, we're going to meet the slave master.
Yeah, this is where we meet Skar Kita, who is the slave master who plays an important role throughout the rest of the novel. So it's not a super important role, but he's prominent.
So it's yet another Zechian character. We're going to see quite a few of them. Has a lot of birds, including a one-eyed raven that just sort of sits on his shoulder, giving him advice.
Quite foul.
And he gets carried around on a massive palanquin. I think, was it 20 odd people carrying him?
Yeah. The description right here at the beginning of chapter 5, where we are introduced to Skar Kita, is actually really well written and is a visual kind of. Once you read it and you're visualizing what Abnett is describing as a very cool kind of chaos scene with a slave lord coming in, influenced by Tzeentch and the magic and power of Tzeentch, and kind of, hues of different colors and baldness and, white skin, and just kind of, if you can really imagine it, it's very kind of a cool description.
Again, quite evocative.
And this isn't even, sort of like a general. This is the guy that you go to put all the slave fetters on.
Yeah. So they split them up. Each one gets certain ones that they've marked. Tsar Bleda gets Von Margus. And for like 3 days, they're marched and they're starving. And then they come to a town that's been sacked. And I think it's an Imperial town that's been sacked. And they're given food.
I would just point out that the title of chapter 5 is Char, and that is an alternate word for the chaos god Tzeentch, which you don't see a ton. Maybe Kerry could speak to this better, but just char is used instead of Zinch for most of this book, if not all of the book. I don't know that Zinch appears.
And if you don't know, Mike is a worshiper of Char because he's gonna use that name for Zinch all the time.
Yeah, I insist on the Discord and calling Zinch Char. And if the people who've read Riders of the Dead know what's up, and they know where we're going with this.
And again, that's the name they use for Zeech throughout all the Spring Driving books, really.
Oh, really? Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So if you go into Urson's Teeth, we're back to Char again.
And we should use Char more.
And we'll get other names for some of the other or aspects. They call them aspects, but of other Chaos Gods and of Zeech at other points in the book. So it kind of talks about how a Chaos God can have different aspects or different names that are worshipped.
Yeah, and we're introduced to a couple more Zars like Zar Herful and Zar Skolte. And so you're getting the sense that there's a lot of these war bands with these Zars, and maybe they comprise maybe like 50 type of guys.
The one line that really stood out of me, it's sort of one of the few times when Abnett uses a bit of a cliche, in my opinion, and Carl is sort of looking out the window, and it's the obscene banners going past. It's like, okay, this is the one time you're not describing what he's seeing. So where do you as the author, or does Carl as the in-universe character draw the line on obscene banners?
Oh yeah.
Well, he can't describe them; they're obscene. I mean, we got to keep it friendly here. Okay.
But
you get the idea. You're an adult.
But are we talking like Fallout New Vegas obscene, where they've done some creative things with human skins, or are we talking obscene as in we know 13-year-olds are going to be reading this, so there's only so much? We don't get any Slaneshi characters. Is this their one appearance, just doing the rounds with the obscene banners to show off?
I will say that when Korn shows up later, it's really surprising because nothing reads as anything other than Zinch up until that moment. So I didn't think Slaanesh before this. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one. There's some Nurgle stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Johann Friedman.
The Korn one is weird because the Korn character is the one doing the sneaky things in that context.
And has a very Zinchy enslaved dude.
And has a shaman.
That's very Zinchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the slave market where we meet Skarkita and the slaves are divvied up between the various Tsars, the army, the coalition starts moving south, and these guys are chained together, the slaves, they're barely having anything to eat or drink. It's not like the Chaos worshippers are providing hot meals or anything. Basically, they're left to their own devices, and if they get sick or they
get like leftover soup or something.
If they dehydrate, they're basically just going to die, and they're okay with it because in their minds, hey, we got these slaves, we're going to get some more at the next town. The strong ones will survive and maybe be useful, and if some die, they die.
Yeah,
that's perfectly okay.
It's definitely the ultimate of social Darwinism here. Like, this is, I guess, like libertarian's delight. If you die, you die.
They're not really a currency so much as you might see in other times and places throughout human history. They're not valuable. They're not really thought of as anything.
So one thing that I thought that was interesting. So they do come to this town and they put them in a temple that's been desecrated by these chaos guys. But then they feed them. They just give them tons of food. And what I thought was really interesting was that Carl, eats his food, and Abnett describes it as like this wonderful meal. It was like the best meal Carl ever had. And that shows up later with something else. But I thought it was interesting that moment he chose a meal to represent something. But I guess we'll talk about more. Because after they eat this meal, then Carl and a few others are taken out of the group.
We've got the narcotic incense first.
Oh, yes.
So kind of in the temple at the time of the meal, basically, the vibe is that the incense is some sort of opiate that, is making everybody, they've got their bellies stuffed full of good food, and they're also inhaling this opiate incense that is, taking the edge off.
Yeah, now they're going to start picking people for the gladiatorial games.
Yeah, we don't know that it's gladiatorial yet because they take a couple of them and they take them outside. And this includes Carl and kind of one of his buddies, Pikeman. Oh, no, he meets this guy, Pikeman Wernoff, and they see two of the czars doing this kind of mock fight, and then they're brought up and they're given weapons and put in armor or whatever. And then Carl realizes that, he as Tsar Ulden's representative and this other guy as a representative of his different czar are now being pushed out to fight each other.
Yeah, we get the Tsar games basically started now. I mean, you have these war bands like we've been talking about, led by these various Tsars who are aligned with various chaos gods. And it seems like what they like to do for recreation / gambling / prestige / power is have their slaves fight these proxy duels. And this will enhance their status or, something.
Yeah, I think this is a really cool way of getting around this idea that, hey, if these cultures really are that backstabbing and that much into fighting as the only way of showing your prowess and your value, then they're just going to all end up dead, right? With like one person in charge. But this gets around that, right? They're going to use proxies.
Yeah, and Carl, he's put into a ring, a crude ring with a pikeman from Stirland, and Carl's basically, hey, I don't want to kill you, like we're men of the Empire, we're above,
right,
killing each other. We shouldn't do this. But then something within himself,
the other guy's
compels
trying to
him.
kill him.
Yeah, and he's thinking, well, maybe I should let this guy just kill me, or something within Carl says, no, I don't want to die right now. I'm gonna kill this guy.
Right. He tried to kill himself with the true killer before, and he'd been unable to. Von Margar had stopped him, and he was like, "Yeah, I couldn't kill myself before, and I don't think I'm going to be able to allow myself to be killed now." And that's when he decides to fight.
So this is kind of a key point in the book with regards to Carl's development while he's associated with chaos,
Right.
and he's now finally taken the life of another Imperial, an innocent. Even though he's put into this tough position where he has to decide what he's going to do. He could just let him kill him, and you could let the guy from Stirland just kill him, and that would take him away from this problem. But he says, no, I'm going to kill in the name of my czar. And that's what he does. That's the decision he makes.
And it, I mean, I don't know if this really matters that much. There's a parallel to the way that these two men work forward or move forward. And actually him killing Wernoff is actually in a later chapter. We actually learned some stuff about around Heilemann first. He is talking to some of the Kislevites. He's learning from them what's going on with him. They're going to Dushika, which is this place that this place that Bardine had not Bardine. Who's the Rota is going.
Yeah, Dushika is the next town that, after Carl fights the pikemen, then we move back to Gerlach's story, and we find that the Rota is moving east. They've been riding for about 3 days to get to this small town called Dushika, and the men of the Rota feel comfortable in this town. It's as if, every Kislevite town treats any troop of winged lancers that come to their town as if it's their sons and brothers. And that's kind of the feeling that you get, even if they don't know them personally, though they may know them personally. Even if they don't know them personally, they're going to treat them as well as they would treat their own unit of winged lancers. And that's where Carl starts to talk to the horse master, Borodin, who speaks Reichspell.
You mean Heilemann? Heilemann starts to do that, not Carl.
Gerlach, yeah. He starts to speak to Borodin, who is the horse master of the Rota, who, is in charge of kind of armor / horse smith kind of guy who's taking care of that stuff, and he speaks Reichspell pretty well.
And it's actually
Because he had studied in the Empire.
it's the first time he's actually shown any interest in Kislev stuff. He's asking like, okay, so what's this word? Because the armor man is like fixing his armor, and he's like, well, what's this word? And it means circle, right? Krug means a circle, but it's like a circle of men. Anytime there's a group together, and then a rota is a banner, and he's interested in learning about the Kislevite people and language, and it's the first time he's ever interested, even in just something as simple as that.
Yeah, there's a few pieces of vocabulary we start to really put together and understand with regards to the Kislevite language, which Krug means banner, but it can also mean
rota,
the body of troop.
Rota means banner.
Okay.
Krug means circle.
Yeah. So rota is banner, but also the men that follow the banner. So is synonymous with unit. Krug is circle, but also can mean a circle of men. So is also synonymous with unit. You can see why Gerlach starts getting a headache,
and why we start getting the headache, because it's like he even has a line. I'll look it up because I actually wrote down the page because it was so confusing. He said, "So I ride in the company of the rota of the Yektik Krug." So it's like I ride in the company of the banner of the Yektik, which is this, or Yektich, which is the place where they're from, Krug, which is the group of men. So the banner of the group of men from Yektik. So he's trying to figure all this out, though.
Yeah, and Polk is army. So that's
another thing
with regards to Kislevite language.
But I think the key here is that he's wanting to learn, at least a little bit.
And he's being exposed to the culture. He's being exposed to a Kislevite town, and he's seeing that the way the economy and culture work is that these people aren't rich, but what they do is they spend all they can on equipping their units because they are a border country and their men are called to war on basically a continual basis because of the nature of their geography and where they're located in the world. And they want to use every resource that they have to try to equip these men in the best way to give them the best chance to be victorious and to survive.
Right. He's learning their martial culture. Also, they get him drunk. Go ahead.
And this is also where one of Games Workshop's lack of research come into it from an earlier edition, and it's then been replicated, because for the equivalent of vodka, the Kislevites call the drink kvass. Now, has anyone ever had kvass?
I've not.
Okay.
No.
Kvass is a very low alcohol soft drink sort of thing. So it's the equivalent of someone persistently referring to whiskey as shandy and just insisting that's the right word. So if anyone familiar with kvass, hearing Kislevites get drunk on kvass so easily, it's funny, but in a you didn't actually know what that word meant, did you way?
Right. Gotcha.
But I would recommend kvass. It is lovely.
There you go.
Just don't drive.
So they do. They work to get him drunk. This was a moment where actually was really powerful to me because I lived in China for a while. And one part of Chinese culture is this drinking culture where if you're in a group or if you're having a party or whatever, and someone toasts you, you drink whatever you have, right? So they give you a drink, they toast you, you have to drink it, and it's not typically something you can politely say, "Hey, I don't want to drink anymore. I'm done." You're going to keep drinking. And it is a part of culture that if you're new or if there's some reason where they want to, I don't know, treat you this way or initiate you into the group, they might do that where a number of them keep coming to you one at a time, forcing you to drink this alcohol. And so you do end up very much like Heilemann does in a drunken stupor. And so for me, it connected a lot to my own experience with an intercultural exchange, just to see it from that, perspective, and to see, okay, that is something that was actually very similar with my own experience. I thought it was interesting and well done, because for a lot of cultures, number one, drinking culture is an important part, but also to see something like that where it was so one-to-one with my own experience of intercultural exchange, it was pretty fascinating.
All right, so another important thing that I just don't really know much about drinking culture. I'm sorry.
No, it was just interesting. It was something that hooked me and made me think, oh, this is a reason why I really appreciate his approach to acculturation.
I like how I just said, all right.
So he also learns about what Riders of the Dead means. They're called Riders of the Dead, and this goes back to that martial culture that everything is focused on their soldiers. He's told that when their soldiers leave home to go fight, they're called Riders of the Dead, and he asks why, and he says it's because they're mourned as dead when they leave, so that the people left at home are not waiting for them, hoping they'll come back. They're assumed dead.
Yeah, which is tough that basically every male between the age of 16 and 50 in their culture is assumed dead. I mean, it's kind of a weird dynamic that I can't really translate to our world. Just kind of this total write-off of, oh yeah, they died a long time ago, and then I happen to see them 6 months later every year for 20 years.
You get the impression
and have a family with them.
You get the impression later on that they sort of fudge this a little bit, because in a later location, the local local rota are sleeping in the Zal, the town hall, because they don't have beds with their families anymore, and yet some of them are getting married still. So I think there's a certain amount of wiggle room on this.
Yeah.
It's a nice like idea that like, oh yeah, we're Riders of the Dead. Our lives were forfeit so long ago. We sacrificed ourselves for this noble cause, but like at the same time, it just doesn't work very well on like a practical level. Like they have families, they collect the harvest, they do all the mundane things that all the rest of us do as well. Like,
I thought it was cool, guys. I'm sorry.
It is cool. It's a cool concept.
No, what I'm saying is they don't lay down this concept and then leave you with all the holes of it. You can clearly see from later on that no, they're practical about this. But yes,
Right.
If you're explaining it to Gerlach as an outsider, you're going to say no, they've been mourned. This is how it works. They're not going to go into the nitty gritty of, well, actually, no, you are still allowed to have. Yes, you're allowed to have a family. You're allowed to see your kids. You're allowed to sleep at your wife's family house three Tuesdays of the month or whatever. They're not going to do that. They're just going to say, yeah, they're dead.
You're dead. Right. He also asks to be the bearer of the rota. And he's told that that's not really what should happen, but because he saved the rota, he's going to be allowed to be the rota bearer.
But
did the last rota guy die at Zavedka?
Yeah, that's he picked it up because he died. I mean, he was already dead, but he died.
There's a bit more. There's a bit more byplay there though, because he asks to be the rota bearer and is told no. It goes to the next most senior member of the rota, and he takes that graciously. And this is part of his character development, that he doesn't demand it; he asks, and then gets told yes, having accepted the no graciously.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about anybody in the unit dying for the rest of the book, I mean, we just have to talk about the fact that, died, as opposed to
dead.
Died.
Did they? Do you like them, or do you like them?
Just be glad.
Just
be glad the Kislevites never fight the Vampire Counts. So I'd be saying that for everyone.
Yeah.
So this is also the first time I think Erla asked what Vebla means.
No one will tell
yeah, that's a thing.
Which is a running joke, basically, in the book.
Yeah.
You've been given your Kislevite name, and no one will tell you what it means, but they keep laughing about it.
Yeah. Vebla. It's clearly some sort of inside joke, but Gerlach's not very quick on the uptake with regards to humor, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
And by this point, the unit is just, that's his name, and are probably not chuckling behind his back about it anymore.
Right, yeah. It's definitely moved from, hey, we're going to call him that to his name is that.
It doesn't seem all that clear that he recognizes that he's being insulted. It seems like more like genuine curiosity, like, hey, what does this mean? As opposed to like, I would pretty clearly recognize like, hey, everyone's laughing. Clearly, this is some sort of insult.
When
like,
the kids at the village meet him and they're like, "What's your name?" and he tells them, and they don't understand, and then he tells them it's Vedle. They're like, ha, 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 ha. And he's like, "Huh? What do you know?"
It's like, yeah, don't you get it? They're making fun of you, buddy.
But speaking of name changes, Carl does kill the pikeman Wernoff because he decides he doesn't want to die, and then he goes up to I don't remember who it is that names him, but someone gives him a new name, and
It's our old name.
Is it okay? Zar Ulden says your name is Azathine, is how I read it. Azathine.
Yeah.
And Carl resists this at first. Carl's still at a frame of mind like, hey, I only killed this guy because I had to. Like, I'm still like a good guy. I'm still a good, loyal Imperial. Like, I'm going to try to escape. I'm not, you can't give me a chaos name. Like, that's.
You can't do that to me. I'm a good guy.
That's untoward.
Yeah.
So after that duel, he's taken back to the temple, which is the holding area in that town. And like everybody else in the slave group is kind of now wary of him, and soon you have kind of a clique formed of the guys who have fought in these single combats between the czars
and somehow survived.
They're the guys who are like, oh, like the other slaves, the other Imperial slaves are like, well, we haven't killed any other Imperials in the name of a chaos god. Like those guys are like persona non grata, like they're real chaos dudes now.
But he says like pretty quickly, he's like, so then over time though, people keep leaving and half of them come back, and now half of the dudes aren't there anymore, right? So like now everyone's basically killed, and it's changed to this situation where they're more comfortable with each other, but they're also not. It's a very serious situation because they all know they've been killing each other, except for von Marger. But he still knows stuff. And then he's taken and he actually kills one of the first guys who had been in the fights. And someone saw him and they're like, yeah, even though he was blind, he knew how to attack and how to repel the attacks of Etzel. And he stabbed Etzel through the heart with two knives.
Yeah, just kind of this notion that, he's really touched by Char and blessed by Char and given this otherworldly ability and sight. He doesn't need conventional sight to, do things. And importantly also here, Carl fights 2 more fights and kills 2 more guys. So not only has he killed Wernhoff, and done that one time when he was forced to, but now he's becoming assimilated into this culture, and this is kind of a thing that he's accepted that he's willing to do.
Well, and one of them wasn't trying to kill him. One of them was like decided he didn't want to fight and was like, I'm going to die. And Carl kills him.
Yeah. So on the 9th day after the first fight, the czars come to the holding area in the temple and they say, hey, we're moving on. And at this point, Carl still is wrestling with this notion that, hey, I'm an Imperial, like I'm a good guy. I'm a captive and I'm a slave, and the army's moving on, and I'm gonna try to escape if I can.
Yeah, and he actually gets the chance, right? He's still got the true killer, which he's planned on using either in an escape or to kill maybe Zar Uldin or someone else. And as they're walking and as they're moving, a group of Reichsguard Templars shows up and attacks and actually kills I can't remember the name, Subutai, who's the shaman of the group.
Shaman, an obvious Conan reference.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that Subutai is explicitly said to be from over above Cathay, and they actually call him a Manchu and say that his people are from adjacent to the dreaded Woe, which, if you're familiar with the old Hordes of Chaos tribal map, was one of the big question marks of, that sounds interesting. Can we hear more about this? I never did.
Gotcha. Well, what happens in this fight?
Sorry, Mike.
Oh, no, Kerry, go ahead.
So the Reichsguard charge in, kill Subutai, the shaman. They start making very short work of the Kurgans that are there. Carl and his followers. Carl cuts himself free using the True Death, then after a bit of consideration, cuts the guy next to him free as well, and they make a run for it. But one of the Reichsguards chasing them, and Carl's companion turns around and says, he's waving and shouting, we're on your side, we're Imperial prisoners, and gets a warhammer to the spine. And Carl is sort of, this is the watershed point of, actually, I can't go back. They don't want me back. Equally, the knight might have just had poor hearing, but this is a major character development moment for him.
It's up in the air. Like, why didn't the knight stop? What's going on? Because he kills him, but then the knight. What happened? The knight gets shot with arrows, I think.
But this is where Ulden and the reinforcements ride in and are just really exploiting the fact that these are Chaos Warriors with bows and just peppering the knights as they ride.
Right, and they end up, killing him. But Carl's able to run a little bit farther away, kind of sneak away. He's hoping to escape, and I guess he's on a bluff or something, because he comes up over this hill and he looks, and there's a battle going on in front of him, and he says it's so chaotic he can't tell who's even going to win, but he feels like things aren't going to look good for the Imperials.
Yeah, you kind of get like one of these dramatic scenes where like Carl is on the road in this ambush or this surprise attack by the Imperial Knights, and then he runs through the forest as he's escaping, and then he kind of like stumbles his way up onto the top of a bluff or a hill, and the panoramic view before him is, this tremendous battle between these two large armies, one Imperial, one Warriors of Chaos, and he sees that, this Chaos host is going to clearly be victorious on the day, and the Empire is, in very serious trouble, and, they don't want him back. First of all, the knight wouldn't take him prisoner or listen to him or liberate him on the one hand. And then on the other hand, he sees that, hey, look, the Empire is, they're cooked. How could they possibly stand? They're suffering defeat after defeat. How could they possibly control or stop this tide of chaos?
It's actually interesting because it says like he couldn't tell by looking who's winning, but he got the feeling that it was going to be another day like Zedevka. Mm-hmm. And so there's there's less like, oh, I can see what's happening, and more guidance. But ultimately he turns around and Tsar Uldin's there, or at least, some of Tsar Uldin's men are there, and they've got stuff to try to catch him, like, I guess, a lariat and things like that. And instead of running and trying to get away, he just kind of turns around and is like, yeah, I'm going to come with you.
Yeah. And with regards to the Imperial Knights and their policy towards Chaos slaves, I would imagine a policy would be, if you are someone who's been a slave of a Chaos warband, you were basically, your life is forfeit. Like, we can't reintroduce you to Imperial society. You've been influenced or touched by Chaos, and like, I'm not going to sit here and do some sort of debrief to figure out whether you're a reliable or not,
How unforgiving of Mike.
Well, I mean, he was marked by Chaos. He's got this mark on his cheek that's like, what, are you just going to like go throughout the rest of your life, having been a member of a Chaos warband for a few months, marked by Tzeentch and or Char, and you're just going to reintroduce into society? Like,
people
you're done for
change, Mike. People can change. Oh, well, actually, since it is Tzeentch, I guess that's the problem. Well, okay, so he runs, but he doesn't escape, and then they take him. They end up taking him again to. Oh, that's right. Because Subutai dies, Tsar Uldin looks weak, and so they take Carl, and Tsar Uldin is talking to him like, "I need you to fight for me again." And this time, Carl knows he has the advantage, and he actually.
I thought it was interesting. There was a poignant moment where Carl comes back to Tsar Uldin after his escape attempt, and Tsar Uldin says, "Change. See, that's Char talking." And Carl says, "No, I'm still not changed, but after Carl had said he changed his mind about escaping.
Mm, right.
Zaraldin said, "Oh, change! Like you're changing. Like you're willing to
Gotcha.
change your mind. Yeah,
You, you do
power is
Aha.
change."
Change,
you,
sucker. Gotcha.
you do you do wonder what else you could get away with as long as you slip the word change into the sentence. So you take the last steak at dinner. Oh, I'm sorry, but I changed my opinion of steak. So you're stretching
Right.
this now, but okay.
You got the best steak last time, so I changed it up.
And this is also a moment where Carl realizes he understands the Warriors of Chaos in their own languages perfectly, and the other slaves are just like, "What are you talking about?"
Oh yeah. See, I was thinking of later.
This is that moment where the language issue comes up again.
Yeah, and it turns
Is that-
out
I thought it was.
it turns out that no, they aren't all speaking perfect Reichspiel all the time. Carl just magically started understanding it. It's a little bit like Antonio Banderas in 13th Warrior, where you can just speak the language now. It's happened by magic. You didn't seem to question it too much, but now it's bothering you.
Really? It's here at this point? I thought it was much later.
Yeah, it's on page about 151 or 150.
Well, that's going to be in the next chapter.
Okay.
Anyway, doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
are you talking about when he's talking with Von Marger?
Yeah, it is later. Sorry, I've jumped the gun on my notes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. So he is taken to fight and to promote Zaraldin, and Zaraldin's like, "Hey, you have to win because my warband looks weak because we lost our shaman. I need you to win." And he's like, "So I've got the power now." And this is where it gets interesting because he says, "Then call me Carl." Right? Like, what's my name? And he says, "Your name is Carl." And he says, "You have to call me Carl."
Yeah, you can just like imagine the scene where he's like trying to form his tongue around the Reich spell. He's like, "Carl,"
Yeah. And so,
Carl.
but he forces him to call, and so you're still given this hope. You're like, oh, he still wants to be Carl, right? Like he still wants to escape, even though he didn't then. Maybe there's something left of him,
Yeah, it's
hopefully.
very much a great job by Abnett to really lengthen and pull the taffy with regards to Carl's transformation.
Right? Because me being this the first time I've read it, I'm still going, okay, he's fighting it. I've figured out that he's got a problem, right? He has a problem, but he's still fighting it. So you still think there's some sort of hope. But then when he's sent to fight,
they're going to give him some proper marauder gear and oil him up.
Yeah, they actually. Yeah. And he goes out, and who he sees in front of him is someone he actually thought was dead. It's Johann Friedel from his own unit, who's the young boy who he thought died earlier. And
he's been marked by Nurgle, and he's really in a bad way.
Yeah.
He's very much kind of the personification of like, yeah, he's already dead. He's not like the Kislevites already dead, who are like still very much alive. Johann Friedel's like you're already dead in a very much like you're at the hollow shell of what a human used to be type of way.
Yeah, and he goes straight out to attacking Carl.
It's sort of, I suppose, in 8th edition parlance, this is someone heading in the Forsaken route to some extent. It's Carl analyzes it as this is his body, but something else has been shoved behind the eyes to some extent.
And he ends up, of course, killing him.
Yeah, so this was a really important combat for the life of Zaraldin's warband, and personally, maybe even the fate of Carl. I mean, I don't know how good Carl's fate is going to be if Zaraldin's warband gets broken up. So
well, Onzolk is going to kill him. That's pretty straightforward.
He's going to die.
Slight spoiler for the next chapter, but this Carl does well enough that they have almost a pick of shamans, and the one that gets recruited is a very young man that Carl had run into earlier this chapter, because the shamans are looting the libraries because they want to steal knowledge.
Right. Because
and Carl was sort of grabbed as a, hey, do you know what this says? And he knows Talian, and it's a military term, and it's like this is a magic in and of itself.
Right. So then we go, of course, back to Heilemann, and he's learning about the nature of the steppe. They're looking at clouds and saying, hey, it looks like that, but that means something. It's teaching us something. And then they come upon the town that they're supposed to go to, which is Leblia, where they're going to meet where they're going to create the Krug?
Polk.
The Polk, sorry, where they're going to join the rest of the Polk. But when they get there, they smell something.
Yeah, and this was all. Leblia was always agreed amongst the Kislevites. They didn't tell the Imperials this, that if the army got trashed, regroup here.
Right.
And they come over.
So that's where they're going to go.
And they can smell something's wrong. They can smell horses, and they can smell what seems like that there might be soldiers. And then it's there's blood as well. This isn't going to be a happy ending where there's an army to save everyone.
Yeah, they say get on your gear, essentially.
Yeah.
And so they do that. They show up, and there's a group called the Kull, which are described as the most feared of the Kurgan from the southern part of the Kurgan areas. And they charge in, they fight them. Again, Abnett's great with these evocative fight scenes. It's looking bad, but from out of the town, out of Leblia, comes Atoll and some horse archers, and they shoot them in the back, and they kind of defeat the Kull.
So the Kull are described as being armed with slings for this sort of pseudo siege. But I want to just pull back to one of the early discussions we had, because we mentioned another Kull earlier. Avasar Kull was the previous Lord of the End Times, ever chosen. And this book really does a disservice to the Kull, because they are sort of described as these raiders and bottom feeders all the time. And yet, 200 years ago, they were the Great Invasion. And currently, at this time, their leader is Crom the Conqueror. And this is around the same period that their army is beating Grimgor Ironhide's army up in the High Pass. So what we get here is a very narrow view of what the Kull are as a tribal grouping. It's not that...
Well, Grimgor will get he'll get a puncher's chance at revenge.
Yeah, I was reading this as throughout history, every army kind of has bottom feeder types who, while the real professional soldiers are, doing the hard work, you kind of have these guys on the peripheries of armies who are just kind of taking advantage of villages if they can, kind of quasi raiders / deserters / not very well controlled free types who aren't the most courageous. Just kind of opportunists.
We find out later that the main Kurgan armies actually divert resources to wiping these guys out at one point.
Well, but later when they get into the city, we find out that a group has come by and had to be distracted. Right? So they fight this battle. They go inside, and they find out that the archers who were left were actually. There had been some other winged lancers that were there, but when a Kurgan army came up, it was much bigger, and to save everybody else, the winged lancers charged out to distract and get the rest of the Kurgan to follow them. That the Kull were left behind to then besiege the city and get the rest of them. And
they have slings.
And they have slings, so throwing axes, slings have the same range, so count them.
No, they don't. Throwing axes are range 6. Slings are range 18 and double shot. If Chaos Warriors had slings, they wouldn't bother with combat. They would just stand there shooting you and absorbing.
Listen, do we even know if Dan Abnett has played a game of Warhammer Fantasy Battles in his entire life?
Oh, I'd be disappointed if he hadn't. I'd be so sad.
It's more that rather than say, right, well, they can't use anything that's ranged, he's looked at this sort of historical cultural situation and thought it's absolutely stupid limiting them to only throwing axes and javelins. That isn't what people do.
Yeah. So they win, and he finds out that he wants them to keep it. So they find out no one else is there. The big group is not meeting there. they don't really have hope of going and fighting the main Chaos Warriors, and Beledny is going to plan on everybody going home. And he finds out that actually Beledny would have gone home at Dushika, except they had Hylaman with them, and that because he was with them, and because Beledny kind of respected him and what he'd done for their rota, he decided to go on to Leblia, and then like still to show that Hylaman is not he knows enough about Kislevite culture to get in trouble. He's still trying to convince them that they should go and protect the Empire, because he's like, well, what if it was your homes that were being wrecked? We need to go protect the Empire. He uses Kislevite culture to try to make arguments, but it's in a really simple way. He says, hey, aren't you the riders of the dead? You're already dead. So why don't we just keep going? Right? And they're looking at him like, no, that's not how that works. And then he says, well, didn't we see those clouds where, and I can't remember, what's the name of that they call the god in Kislev? It's not Urson. They call it something else.
Dazak.
Daj.
Tor's easy. Urson's easy. The D one I can never get right.
Yeah. So he's like, well, Daj showed us in the clouds this thing, so doesn't that mean we should go on? I just found it really simple, or really interesting, because that's something that's easy to do in this kind of acculturation process, is to think that you know enough to manipulate it, but it's still for your own cultural perspective. So I thought that was really well written.
What was really interesting for this also was Beledny's saying, if it wasn't for you, I would have gone home. And
right.
You as the reader in the back of your head are thinking, well, if you seem a pretty stand-up guy, if you would have just gone home, that means there's probably an awful lot of rotors that did just abandon it and go home.
Yes.
And therefore, they're still on the table somewhere.
Right.
So it sort of sets up some things that are going to be used later in terms of the Kislev army is not out for the count. They just all went home.
You kind of have this natural tension, like you find it. I don't know if any of you guys like the movie The Last of the Mohicans, but like this idea that the militia has been called out, which is the Kislevites, and they're going to go fight in a war down south and west, while they're going to leave their villages defenseless basically during the middle of this massive chaos invasion. It's like, don't they have concern for their villages? I know they're already dead, but like, you know, their families are alive.
It's the sort of pre-first Manassas dilemma.
Look at you. Oh, good job.
Look at me using the southern names for battles.
Oh well, no, we'll have to get beyond that, except Bull Run. But one thing he said, he gets, so then there's also one person who is really injured in the battle, Vetley. What happens to him?
Oh yeah, that's super interesting. So the notion of a step burial isn't reserved for the dead Kislevites,
or even the partially dead.
Yeah, it's also applicable to the mortally wounded / possibly mortally wounded, such that a
slightly sick,
or if you're just not feeling so well, I guess
a light cough.
It's like the Monty Python, I'm getting better, you know, type of thing.
All right.
And so this guy's in bad shape. Kvetle, not sure how you pronounce it exactly. Basically, the notion is you put him on the horse, he's going to ride and sweat it out. And if he lives, great, he'll just ride back. And if he dies, well, you know, that's part of a step burial that, you know, you're kind of in the hands of the sweat it out on the step policy.
He just gets on his own horse and sets himself up, and Hylaman's like, why is no one helping him? No one's like treating him or trying to fix him. They're just letting him go, and there he goes. He's going to die out there.
Yeah, does this village have an apothecary type of thing? But no, yeah, that's their culture. That's seems like a really rough way to die. I mean, you'll probably die of starvation or dehydration or exposure, or, you know.
Well, he takes food with him. We know that.
Things. Yeah, but how long does it last, right? I mean, it's just
At least 10 days or something.
because as we see with Gerlach in the not so far future, I mean, the steppe is basically in a lot of ways a desert, and
Notion.
the Kislevites are going to have a better ability with it, but still, obviously it's a bad spot.
So he goes out and he gets mad. One thing that I thought was really interesting is he's mad, right? Heileman's mad. And he's like, why are you letting him go out? And they say, well, he's just going to go out there. And if he's going to heal up, he'll sweat it out and then he'll come back. And if not, well, he'll be dead. And he was already dead. So everything's fine. And Heileman says, it was if writing assured every question of life. And he was rejecting it, but it also showed he understood something about the culture, that he's looking at it and going, it's like, riding is everything to them, right? Like being on the horse and being on the steppe is the most meaningful thing in their life. And he didn't understand it, but he knew it. And I thought that was fascinating.
I mean, also at the same point, there's like an economic consideration here, because like a highly trained and effective warrior of prime fighting age just shouldn't probably be like so casually discarded. That's like a valuable commodity.
Well, there's always
in
going to be
society,
as
I would
many
think.
warriors as are needed for the story, Mike. This is still the Warhammer world.
So when Beledny and the Rota decide that they're going to head back to Yechich, which is their hometown, Gerlach comes up with the idea that, hey, I'm going to steal the unit standard
The Rota.
and I'm going to ride south with it as far and as fast as I can, and they're going to be forced to come with me and to chase me, because they're going to, the unit standard is, everything with regards to this martial culture and their pride, and they could never let, this Imperial just run away with their unit standard. And so I'm going to make them come south and west, and then once they catch up to me, then since we're already here south and west, we might as well just continue this war against chaos while we're all together down
his
here.
plan is
no
not
hard feelings.
It's not well thought out.
Yeah, we're already here, so might as well just fight.
Yeah.
So that's what he does, and that's where we leave him and go back to Carl.
Not yet. Yeah. We've got a couple of pages where we're doing this third person perspective again, and they're actually going to debate whether Archaon is real. Was Archaon really a person, or was Archaon just like a boogeyman that all these different warlords used to scare people? And sort of almost like a demigod, where we have to do it. It's Aldous Archaon, not from me. You can't question it.
Look, if I could live in a world where Archaon didn't actually exist, I'd be happy, because I don't really like Archaon.
But the amusing, of course, part of this is that, well, Archaon's going to turn up and be front and center next year. So where's this perspective, sort of a 2020 perspective, coming from? Is it from sort of 6 months down the line before that happens?
Yeah, they talk about what Archaon is wanting to do, and then we go to Carl, and Oldine is saying, like, he's still trying to keep control of Carl, who is now often called Carl Azitzin, right? The two of them together, and Oldine is saying, like, I could have killed you. You remember that? Remember, I could have killed you, and I still could. I've still got power over you, but I don't. So just remember that. Some people said I should have, but I didn't.
And the army as a whole is now not reasonably deep into the Empire in Ostermark, and is now going to cross over into Ostland, which is west of Ostermark. They have two provinces called Ost, and they're obviously one is more Ost than the other.
Makes sense. East.
East, yeah. So what we're going to find here is that a new character is introduced to the book. We get introduced finally to a High Czar, which is a general who is going to command a certain amount of regular czars, war bands, and coalesce them into a fighting force, to fight Imperial armies or greater sized units. And we meet Cirtha Link, and what had happened was the Chaos Army had left Brunmarl, and they had headed to Verdun to join up with Sir the Link's army. And then they're heading into Ostland. And before they get to Wolfenburg, which is the capital of Ostland, they come across an Imperial army, which is blocking their way, presumably, to the capital of Ostland. They're making a stand here at Acton to try to halt the assault on the capital of Ostland, Wolfenburg. And Karl's talking with Tsar Uldin, and he's examining the Imperial positions. And he's like, "Hey, Tsar Uldin, like, these positions look pretty formidable. You know, a frontal assault is probably not going to be a very good idea." And Tsar Uldin's like, "Oh, wow.
No,
Very,
he's actually
very
saying
good idea."
he's actually saying they're not going to come off of their position.
So
they're in
it-
defense, and if we don't attack, they'll just sit there and they win. So we actually, even though it's bad to do a frontal attack, it's our only shot.
Okay. So Tsar Uldin then takes Karl to Sir the Link, and so Karl, as it's seen, is now meeting figures who are higher up in the hierarchy of these chaos forces,
And he finds them
and
disgusting.
Sir the Link is described as a giant type of human that's also kind of controlled by a baby
Deformed.
that's kind of attached to it, but both of them are grotesque and distorted, and nasty.
This Chaos Lord is basically Krang out of Ninja Turtles.
That's exactly what I thought of.
So once again we've got a new Chaos character introduced, and once again they've got a full focus on Zeech, full mutation, full fate is everything.
Yeah, and Karl at this point is really pretty much chaosified. He is wearing arm rings that are given for acts of valor.
He's been
for
given
service to
armor
the
and
Chaos
weapons.
gods. Yeah, kind of a nod to the Viking kind of arm ring you would get for some sort of martial act. And so Karl is becoming a celebrated champion of chaos at this point.
He's full on riding into battle with them, though he does have two Kurgans behind him to make sure he doesn't run away.
Right. The rest of the prisoners shrink away from him and don't want to talk to him.
Yeah, so Sir the Link, when Karl walks into his tent, basically says he smells change. Like, you know, Karl's giving off a very strong Zeech/Char vibe, and that he's picking up on that.
Any parent has also noticed when one of their children waddles into the room and also has a change, or at least needs a change. You can smell it.
Yeah. So Karl is starting to develop a reputation that's even above Tsar Uldin. So Karl's starting to develop a reputation that's, you know, as a champion of Zeech, that is someone who's going somewhere and who's in his early 20s, if age matters at this point when you're touched by chaos. I don't know, but he's a young guy who's really going somewhere quickly up the ladder of these chaos forces.
Right. We're now gonna have only our second battle, or bit decent sized battle of the novel, and we're 2/3 of the way through now. Just to clarify, so it's been a long time since Avedka, and we're gonna see what happens when two units that you definitely will never see on the tabletop fight. We're going to see Imperial pikemen, and we're going to see Chaos Warhounds that can actually do stuff.
They must have been cornhounds, right? They had to have been.
So we're into this sort of looking at historical parallels and thinking about how this would work practically. So the Chaos Hounds are released. They go underneath the pike points, plausible, and pull the pike formation apart by, you know, if a large hound starts savaging your crotch, you probably start forgetting about the pike.
Yes.
Believable.
And so this leads to a gap in the lines that the knights can then charge through, and ultimately results in a collapse for the Imperial army, and they lose. There are a couple. Oh, go ahead.
And Karl's group get all the way through the infantry line, are heading into the sort of Imperial reservists. Comes up against, I believe it's a demilancer, and get shot in the face.
Yeah, you're left with like a little bit of a cliffhanger. Like, Oh, did Carl just die?
Or is this going to wake him up? Right? Is this going to bring him back to where he was?
Oh yeah, he's gonna be able to reintegrate into Imperial society now.
but it is Carl's second battle head injury and consciousness fake out, and the last one didn't make him more palatable to Imperial reintegration, did it? So
no,
he's getting that CTE.
Well, but one thing that had happened before that, you get this idea that he knows what the Chaos armies need to do, right? He tells them what the Imperial army is trying to do, but he's also forgotten a ton of stuff. He's looking at the battle before it starts, and he's looking at all the heraldry of the Empire, and he can't remember what any of it means. He doesn't know which units are which. He even sees a twin-tailed comet and doesn't know what it is.
And it's been touched by Char.
And I thought that was really important that like he's forgotten Sigmar. And so, yeah, he's in trouble. And then when those two soldiers tell him, hey, we're here to kill you if you don't fight, he actually says something that I thought was really powerful. He says, I can only go forward because going back now would be too hard. And I thought that was so well written because I think that's so true of humans. It's just what we do, right? We would rather embrace some irreality or embrace something, in this case, evil, than to say, I've done something wrong and I have to turn around and fix it. And he does, and he does that very human thing and says, I'm just going to keep going with the bad choice. And later, he says it shows him as being thankful that he doesn't remember everything because he says memory makes life harder. And I just thought that was well written by Abnett. It's very human.
Yeah, I mean, he really has no choice but to go forward. Either it's kill yourself or, become chaos because he can't reintegrate. I mean, he's kind of at the point where like his left arm is a tentacle almost. Like he's just, he's gone. He's touched.
He has no tentacle arms, Mike. Don't miss.
Yeah, but you understand the point. He's too deep.
Well, I really like that because I think it's very, very true of humans. If we make bad decisions and instead of facing them, double down on what they make us instead of addressing.
We do get a bit of what appears to be magic, though it could equally be just massive coincidence that the clouds go dark. The clouds all come in and lightning bolts start hitting the back end of the Empire army.
But given what happens later, maybe not.
Yeah, but there's no one at the front of the Chaos Army waving their hands around making it happen. It's subtle enough that it's not. If we're still talking in terms of this is a jumping off point for intro to Warhammer lore, it's not in your face high magic fantasy.
Yeah. All right, so we jump back over to Gerlich Heilemann, and he is alone on the steppe with his nightmares.
Yeah, we actually get a lot of pages kind of devoted to this chapter of Gerlach and a couple other people basically being steppe wanderers. It takes up quite a bit of the later part of the book where Gerlach has taken the unit standard and he's headed south and west, and he keeps looking back over his shoulder expecting to see the unit following him, and it just doesn't happen for days and days, and the days start to drag, and his horse, he loses that at one point and then he has to find it again.
Well, before we get to that, I think it's cool that, like, number one, he's more afraid of the steppe than he is of being caught by the people whose rota he stole. But also, this is that moment with the attention to detail where he's alone on the steppe with his horse, and he's like, oh, wait, those steppe ponies were so much better suited to this life than my horse, because my horse won't eat this grass unless the steppe horses or the steppe ponies kind of show him to do it. Anyway, I just thought it was really, really good, really well written.
My horse needs peer pressure.
Exactly. He's a big
Yeah,
horse.
he's used to like oats and
He is.
grain.
He's got to have the good stuff. So
And the amount of like oats and grain and like fodder that a cavalry horse like that would need would probably be a tremendous amount, I
right.
would imagine.
So his horse is starving. He's hearing voices. He gets down and he looks under a rock to try to find where these sounds are coming from. And that's when his horse runs away and he has to start chasing it. And he finds it.
Yeah, there's like there's something there with like spirits as well.
Yeah.
Right. Like step spirits, that kind of spook his horse and spook him. And like he's kind of going insane basically.
Because he's out alone on the
Exposed to, yeah, since he's out alone on the steppe, which is basically a desert type situation, or basically being stuck in a dinghy, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean type of situation. Like he doesn't have access to food or water, and he's it doesn't really rain probably very much out there, and so he's just getting sunbaked and just kind of losing his mind, and kind of losing his orientation. And he loses his horse at one point when he's spooked, and he's fortunate enough to find it again
because it stops,
yeah.
because it's looking at something, and what it's looking at is some riders.
Yeah, so what happens there is our gentleman who was put out to pasture, so to speak, and told to sweat out whatever problems he had, is actually still alive. And he didn't just collapse a few dozen miles from the town and die. He's actually still alive, and he seems to have recovered to a certain degree, and he's being chased by 5 raiders. And Carl sees this as an opportunity to fight some chaos dudes and try to help rescue this guy. And he shoots one of them in the neck, and then him and Kvetla, fight the other guys and are able to rescue each other in a way, and team up as a crew to kind of help each other navigate the steppe, and
they flee to
see if they can get back to the unit, or they can figure something out.
And they flee to a big rock.
They flee to a big rock, yeah, and that's where they run into more trouble with raiders. They get up onto the rock formation, and they are in the caves up there, and they notice raiders coming, and they start climbing the formation further up to try to get away and make it difficult for their pursuers. And things are really looking like a bad way for these two. They're outnumbered, undersupplied.
They're at the top of this rock, and it's really hot, and they don't have enough water. Their horses are kind of hidden below, but they can't get to them. There's people coming. They don't, if they're going to stay there very long, they're in big trouble.
Then the cavalry arrives.
Yeah. What Texas battle is this like, Kerry? What Texas battle?
To be honest, I get Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid vibes if the US cavalry swooped in and saved them at the last minute.
There you go. All right, we'll count it. You can keep your Texas card.
Wasn't Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid like down in Bolivia or something?
It was by the end, yeah. I'm not aware of that many 2 guys on a rock last stands in Texas.
Yeah, neither am I.
I'm aware of many situations where the cavalry arrives at the last minute, but it tends to be more westerns rather than Texan history.
So the Yechtich Krug kind of shows up right at the right moment there to offer salvation to these 2 who are stuck on top of the rock, and the raiders kind of see them coming, and they're not interested.
Gerlach seems like he's gonna be happy to take his punishment, but then it turns out
Boledny's angry, but Vetlai has told him something, and what he's told him is that there's actually is an army that perhaps Dodge has other plans. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's another thing. But there's a polk that they can go to at Zoyschenk, that had tried to avoid the other armies, and so they'd gone even farther away. So there actually was a polk that they can join.
So Beledny's sort of been in this situation of, let's go home. Nah, come on, we'll go to the muster point. Right, okay, no one was there. Let's go home. He's run off with a standard. Chase him. Now let's go home. Oh, now we're expected to muster. Right, okay. I really wanted to go home, guys.
Right.
Yeah, and Gerlach at this point is like so kind of used up from his time in the steppe and dealing with the raiders and everything that he's not really in a fit state to go to war.
Right.
And so
when they get back to the town where this polk is, it's like they're like, oh, we're actually going to get to fight. This polk is going to go fight. And then Abnett says, perhaps Dodge had other plans for Heilemann, because Heilemann gets sick from an arrow that he had barely been hit by during this fighting, and the polk ends up having to leave without him, and he doesn't get to go fight like he had wanted to.
They go off, and I mean, we're skipping a bit ahead, but the polk goes off and has a battle which they win. They give another of these Kurgan hordes led by Okade Tarsus a bloody nose, and then they go home for the winter.
Right, and he decides he's going to go with them.
Yeah, and there was a moment there where Beledny has to ask Gerlach, hey, is it okay if someone else carries the Rhoda banner? And it's kind of an emotional thing for Gerlach. And then he, makes it a priority to get himself back into shape, and he's going to go follow, the army. But then by the time he's really in shape,
they're back.
They've
kind of come back through.
Right. Yeah.
And if we cut back to Carl with his bullet-ridden face.
Yeah, we find him, and he has a big scar on his face where this bullet hit him, but it still has some smoke marks on it.
Yeah, so it's hit his brow ridge, it's collapsed his eye, that eye's gone, and then there's permanent powder burn scarring because of how close it was, that sort of snake around this destroyed eye socket and scar tissue like snakes are coiling around it.
Right.
So he looks like he's got the mark of Zeech for half his face. That's where they're going with this.
Right. And they're going to go besiege Wolfenburg. They do that for 12 weeks. A lot of people are upset because Cirtha Link, who's the High Czar, seems to be taking too long. And so Cirtha Link, and this shows how important Karl is, goes and asks blessings of Karl because his group, his war, his army is getting unruly. It's taking too long. And when he asks for Karl's blessing and Karl gives it, lightning destroys the gatehouse that had been stopping them from getting into Wolfenburg.
Now, before we go any further, this sort of is covered very, very quickly in like 2 or 3 pages, and it can feel a little bit rushed until you realise there is an entire separate novel about the Siege of Wolfenburg called Mage Storm that came out, I think the following month. Little bit of lost tension if you read the synopsis of that, because it's asking, will Wolfenburg fall? And if you've read Rise of the Dead that came out last month, it falls.
Yes, it will.
But there's an entire novel dedicated just to the Siege of Wolfenburg. I am in no way advocating go out and read Mage Storm. It is not a good novel. It is a slog. It's a slog to get through, and really is not particularly entertaining. But it exists.
This podcast will not be reviewing it.
This is also why it's a 12-week siege, and it's not like why didn't we just fireball the gatehouse down ourselves?
Why don't we do the magic bit at the beginning?
And it is because It is because
Go
during Mage Storm, the wizards just constantly complain that the winds of magic are low, there's no strength to the winds of magic, we can't do anything. And this is more or less the entire plot of Mage Storm, just wizard.
Sounds like my game earlier today where I rolled Snake Eyes the first turn for Winds of Magic.
They roll Snake Eyes every turn for 12 weeks. And the garrisons are getting really annoyed. Like, why are we putting up with this wizard grumbling at us? They're useless. Magic doesn't exist anymore. And then
Could it be because it's Tzeentch? Could it just be that they had actually cast stuff at the gatehouse so many times that it had a 2-up regen save that it couldn't get past? In any case, they do get past it.
Yeah, they get in there. Wolfenberg gets it.
During this time, Carl does learn how to make a recurve bow. Like, that's the big cultural thing he learns during this period. He learns about recurve bows, and that's kind of cool. And then Tsar Oldine becomes Hetzar Oldine, and he's given command over some of the others. And they're told to march north and fight. And they actually end up fighting this army, or some of this army that the Kislevites have been fighting.
So this is the big raider army that had been seen besieging Leblia and then had run off chasing the Rota that we never saw. But it's all these raiders who are supposed to be members of the Cull, and they are now being chased by Okade Tarsus's army of Kurgans because they've just become too annoying.
Right. So he thinks he's done this great thing by fighting these raiders, but in actuality, they were just running from Okadai.
Yeah.
And so then they all decide, or he decides, we're just going to go and have the winter at Chamondarik.
Yeah, Chaos does winter quarters just like 18th century European armies. You know, they're very formal. There's a campaigning season.
Look, you still got to eat.
Well, I don't know if they do actually, but
and this is this sort of spiritual neutral ground where violence isn't meant to happen over the winter. So
right.
There's a permanent hall there. There's a priesthood, priestesses, and
we can butcher the name of it. Chamondarik.
Chamon.
That's the place they go.
And it's this huge burial mound full of gold, of supposedly cursed gold that everyone's got this sort of like pinky swear that they won't loot, and then don't.
And don't for now.
Yeah, a couple other war bands had showed up as well, and so I guess there's kind of this notion of a truce, and like if you get multiple war bands of Chaos Warriors together for any period of time, you're gonna have violence pretty much.
So
but they try to keep it in check as best they can.
So we have one group. The other war bands have got one group that are sort of traditional Norse, and they are corn worshippers. And this is the only time that we suddenly get a reveal of Zarblade has been a corn worshipper all along, and it never came up. Just to try and put some variety in there. And the other group are Dolgans. Now, Dolgans don't show up too often. They show up in some of the roleplay supplements, but they also are the army of... Sorry, pause. They are also the army of Sile the Faithless in Tamarkan, if anyone's read that. So when the Sile the Faithless with his pet spawn Nightmare is recruited by Tamarkan along with a bunch of mammoths, they are the Dolgans that have suddenly joined the army. So we have encountered them elsewhere in 8th edition.
Okay, good to know. It's also the time that he talks to Von Marger. It's the first time he's kind of seen Von Marger, and he's like, oh yeah, wow, there you are. And he speaks to him, and they're talking about, like, Von Marger's talking about being Imperial, whatever, and Carl says something to him, and Von Marger says, hey, why are you using their language? Like, use Reichspiel. And he says, oh, I am speaking Reichspiel, just like normal. And Marger says, no, you're not. And it's a moment that makes very clear that actually Von Marger has tried to keep his own identity, and Carl has given it up.
Carl makes a point of not going near the big shrine in the burial mound pretty much all winter until eventually the shaman is insisting that that you have to. There's a reason. Trust me on this. I've been there an awful lot this winter, and oh look, my hands are now bird talons. Come on, just do the thing.
Well, and Carl's a little bit. He's worried about Zarbleda coming and trying to kill him.
Yeah, it's very much a winter of intriguing between these war bands and these czars, and power disbursement, and rivalry, and where's Carl going to end up in this? I wouldn't say chess game, more like a checkers match of rivalry.
Alden's trajectory has been because of Carl, which in turn means that Blader and Onzolka, who's still around wanting Carl dead anyway, know that if they can off Carl, then they can potentially get that promotion to Hetzar instead of Alden.
Right.
So he recruits his own group of the war band, who are his bodyguards all winter, and eventually the shaman is dragging him out without them, and something's going to happen. Gets him to the shrine, gets him blessed by Zeech, so that he now has a blue glowing all-seeing eye within the sort of scabbed over socket in his ruined face.
Right. Growing blue, can see anyway. And yes, the shaman has bird hands, talons. And when he's leaving, Carl sees On's, what's it? Man, I cannot remember his name. Onzolger. Well, actually, first he sees von Marger, who has come to kill him.
And Carl says...
Yeah, von Marger's become the champion of another Tsar, basically.
Of Zarbleda, yeah.
And Carl says, but you said I was going to kill you. And von Marger says, but fate doesn't work that way. I can change fate. You haven't killed Alden yet, for instance. And they have this debate about, but I have given him his 5th mark down at Wolfenburg, so that counts. I'm getting there. So
yeah, I love what he says. You haven't killed him, and it's like, say the yet, but he never says yet. He should, but he doesn't.
So it feels like quite a petty argument, but from Von Marger's perspective, if he can see the future, he knows how this is going to play out, and he knows that he needs to go through the motions, and there's no point in being just cards on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tsar Olden's been alive like 100 pages too long at this point. Obviously he's blocking Carl's ascension, right, to his final form. Right. And it's like, obviously Carl's not going to be a servant to Tsar Olden. We've only got not that many pages left. So.
Yeah, so
we've sort of really increased the pace of what we're going through. After Heilmann used up a good chunk of page count wandering the steppe, there is much
that was like so many pages.
So he actually very swiftly kills von Marger, right? Like, I mean, they fight.
It's
back and forth
not a long
for a while. They fight back and forth, but Carl, or as it's seen as at this point, really, is like, well, Zeech will decide, and then they go and fight, and he cuts off von Marger's whole arm at the shoulder and kills him. And not to be done with that, he then goes and finds Onzolger and kills him. And then Zarbleda comes out and is like, yeah, I see her better than me. I swear you my allegiance. And he's like, good. I'm going to kill you now. And then he kills him.
So having just established this is a Khorne character, he's sort of begging for mercy in the next line to get.
I mean, at that point,
Blade is killed by arrows. Blade is killed by arrows in his back. I don't think Carl killed. I guess somebody else killed him.
No, Alden and the bodyguards shoot Blader in the back.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right.
Yeah, and then Alden sort of like doing the scared but I'm proud of you moment, and then gets shanked.
Right.
By Carl.
Yeah.
Which was we all saw coming.
And so Carl is obviously now Tsar or Het Tsar.
Tsar et Zine.
He doesn't get the promotion straight to Hetzar because that would require Lenk to be there to promote him. He's very clearly now in charge, and everyone's scared of him.
Everyone's following him, so de facto.
Yeah, they're definitely scared of him.
I don't know about de jure, but de facto, he's in charge. So then we get to go to the Yetch-Ditch. Yeah, and before he gets there, Hyluan is discovering, like, oh, I thought the previous place where we spent a lot of pages was the open steppe, but this is the really open steppe.
But we don't have any pages left to spend a lot of time here, so I'm just going to comment on it and move on.
Yeah.
This is even more remote than that place I went insane in because it was so remote.
Yeah.
So we get to Yetch-Ditch, and because these are their riders of the dead, we don't have the sort of celebratory banging pots and pans. This is heartfelt hug time, and Gerlach feels a bit left out until they then start introducing him to everyone.
As, of course, Vebla.
Yes, and he still doesn't know what it means.
No, but
at this point in the book, there's only about 20, 30 pages left of the book, and basically Carl has gone full native at this point. He's basically, he's almost basically a Kislevite at this point.
Yeah.
Just kind of like
you called him
the transformation is complete.
You called him Carl again.
Oh yeah, it's Hyluan.
Oh,
so
Kerlach, yeah.
So some new young men are made into lancers. They're accepted in. We learned a couple things about Kislevite culture that I thought were really cool. Again, I like this acculturation process. Every battle is considered the last battle. You should always fight as if it's the last battle because you're already dead, and if you don't, you'll definitely die. But the coolest thing that I thought was when they do this mock shaving, this mock shaving of the young men's heads, right? Because they've got this top knot is basically what they have for their hair, and so they pretend, Beledny pretends to shave it with his lance tip or whatever that's been sharpened, and Hyluan asks about it, and it's to represent that, or it's that every single one of them before battle sharpens their lance and then shaves their face and shaves their head with their own lance blade, and that way Beledny will know that anyone who has a scraggly face that's not well shaven didn't sharpen their lance well enough. It's just those little things to show the culture that I thought were fascinating.
And this also conveniently leads us to the last of the user questions from
Yes, it does.
Mikos. Do they complement one another on their impressive facial hair? And the answer is therefore yes, because if their facial hair is impressive and well kept, that means their lance is sharp.
There you go. And everyone needs a sharp lance. We also see that Vebla has a dream in which he's going to fight some massive evil warlord character. He and the others talk. He thinks it's Archaon that he's going to fight. And the others, all the others have this same dream.
It's kind of an aggrandizing dream. Like, I'm going to be the guy that takes on Archaon. No. You're going to take on the newly promoted Tsar.
I mean, the amount of character development Gerlach has at this point was far more than Valton ever got. So, fair play to him if he wants a crack at him.
So the Demilancer standard bearer guy is going to take on Archaon.
Well, they'll talk about that later, how he feels about having that dream.
And
but it's also interesting at this point in the book. Like, this is very close to the end of the book, and it's the longest stretch of time that is captured by just a few pages. Like, they're there for the course of a winter and a few months.
Yeah,
it seems like, and so time is marching on.
And who wants to give the big reveal? Because he finds something from the sister of one of his buddies, from the guy he saved, from Svetlai's fiance's sister.
While dancing with her at their wedding, he finally finds someone who'll tell him what Vebla means.
That's right. Who's gonna reveal it?
Isn't it like baby lamb or something?
You got to give more than that.
Yeah. So the Vebla is the runt of the litter of goats that whinges and cries and complains and annoys everyone trying to get more milk.
So you can imagine how sheepish Heilemann felt.
So if we go all the way back to that first encounter where he is sort of ranting and complaining about after the failed charge into their own allies, this was Beledny turning to Carl and saying, "So he's an annoying little so and so, isn't he?"
Right, and
that's always been what they've called him.
Yeah, it's a great moment, and they kept it secret from him. Really pulled the wool over his eyes. So they didn't want to, I guess they did kind of ram it down his throat the times they said it.
And now they are. It is now the spring thaw. They are going to ride back to join the Polk and go back to war. We really don't have much breathing space here.
Yeah. It's speeding up. They're going back. They're going to join the Boyarin, is he like a nephew or is he an uncle of the...
second cousin of the Tsarina.
There you go, second cousin, Fyodor Kirkovsk. And they're going to go out to fight Okadai Tarsus, but they actually are delayed. And so the Boyarin defeats Okadai before, and his Norskia, before they can get there, before the Rota gets there.
So we don't see the Battle of Pradeshnaya. No, damn it, wrong one. Pradeshnaya was the Salt Flats. We don't see the Battle of Krasnikano in any books, but we get a lot more references to what happened there if we jump sideways into the Ambassador Chronicles first half of Ursun's Teeth. Because after Krasnikano, all the generals go back to Kislev city to celebrate the victory, and more intrigue happens then. So, Again, 4 books forming one narrative, and where they drop plot lines or skim over stuff, it's often picked up somewhere else.
So, in this, if you're going to read those, this is still going to be a spoiler. Okadai Tarsus is defeated, and this means now that there needs to be a move by at least some forces for Archaon to protect his flank as he moves into the Empire. So he's going to need something to protect his flank now that Okadai has been defeated. And of course, he sends the army that has Tsar Ezetsine in it.
But what we're not seeing on the other side, and it's surprising that Beledny's lot don't really comment on this, the Tsarina herself comes out to the battle at Mazharod because Kislev now knows they can win. So we've had 4 times as many soldiers gather to their Polk alone. This is really Kislev fighting at its prime now, rather than it being a sideshow next to the Empire.
Cool. And at this battle, it's going really well for Kislev. The Warriors of Chaos. What's that?
They rolled on the random terrain table, and they got a raging torrent river right down the middle. That doesn't work well for cavalry armies.
Yeah. And so the Chaos army has to cross it, and they're getting wrecked because as they're crossing the river, they're just getting pelted by bows. They're all dying. And this is when Ezetsine says, or, Carl Ezetsine says, Zinch, what are you doing? And suddenly the river freezes, and the guys that were in the river trying to cross it also freeze, and it means that the Warriors of Chaos can cross,
which is a nasty surprise.
Yeah, and the first sort of wave of Kurgan horsemen just catch a whole contingent of horse archers on the hop and cut them to pieces.
Yeah. And
You can imagine like the one guy who's in the river who gets like half his torso stuck.
yeah, well, yeah. So it's one of those Zinch giveth and Zinch taketh away. If you're one of the warriors of chaos who gets stuck in the river, but
it was part of the great plan.
Yeah, Czar, as it seemed, definitely like moves forward, and they go in and they crush one flank. He and his guys crush one flank of the army of Kislev, and at the same time, Rota Yechich is on kind of, I guess, on the other flank or something, and they defeat Tsar Kreia with their charge.
And then we've got a squaring off of the two main characters' cultures and their bodyguards and their units and all their mates. And they are going to smash into each other. And it is Carl's bodyguard is fighting the person whose wedding Gerlach was dancing at. Everything is now personal as long as you've kept up with who's who.
Which you probably haven't, because there's a lot of names. But
the big thing here is that Beledny fights Carl at As It's Seen.
Big thing to you. Who even cares about Beledny? Okay, I care about Beledny. I like Beledny.
He seems like a swell guy.
Yeah.
And he's one of these characters at the end of the book that's let go and is killed.
And
at the final moment,
and he's a better fighter than Heilemann, right? Like they fought hand to hand. Heilemann saw him fight in the river against this other strong dude. He's a really good fighter. He fights with great skill against Carl, and Carl defeats him.
And after all this, mysticism and importance of the banner, when Beledny goes down, Heilemann essentially rams the banner into the ground, puts it to one side, and just charges berserker style. And As It's Seen is like, well, this is going to be easy. This is not a hard fight for me to win.
He barely has a weapon,
and gets one moment of clarity of who he's fighting, because that's what happens when you have this magical, all-seeing eye lodged in your head. And that split second costs him everything, because he gets a demilancer rapier rammed right through his torso.
Right. He sees Heilemann and he's like, "Oh my goodness, that's Gerlach Heilemann."
Yeah, I thought you were dead. Last time I even thought about you, it was, "Oh, Heilemann must be dead. He did spit on me that time, huh?"
Right.
And I don't like him.
But that's enough. Yeah. And so it's a really quick it's like, oh, that's who he is. Oh gosh, I'm dead. Right? Like it's written that quickly. There's no, big sword fight.
Yeah, I guess they couldn't have a big sword fight because Carl As It's Seen should be theoretically so much better. Like it just makes more sense that, oh, I've had this weird moment of unclarity and I'm befuddled, and he took advantage of it, than like some sort of dramatic duel where like Gerlach suddenly becomes a guy who's able to defeat a high czar.
I think it works really well like this. Yeah.
The message is knowledge might be power, but sometimes it stabs you in the back.
Yeah, Char giveth and Char taketh away. This is all part of Char's plan anyways.
Yeah. Well, and just who they were coming back and still being a part of what's going to ultimately happen. And later, as Heilemann looks at his helmet right after he's killed Carl, or As It's Seen, he looks at it and he thinks to himself, he says, if he'd known for a moment the identity of his foe, perhaps he would have hesitated. Right? So it's not that he knew who it was and didn't hesitate. It was that he didn't know, because Carl had changed so much is why he was able to be killed.
And we're now into the wrapping up. Gerlach hands the rotor off to one of the younger guys. He sees in the clouds a shape that looks to him like a mother goat with some baby goats, so Vebla, and decides he's going to head off into the sunset.
which was
He's kind of like Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves, where he's gone like full native.
he goes. I don't know where he goes. He just goes, wanders off. I didn't like the ending.
Well, I mean, his horse had been painted the Kislev way. He's adopted the Kislev culture. I don't know if he's going to go back to the Empire or not, but it could go either way, I guess.
It feels like there could have potentially been a follow up here. There never was. And I'm not saying that was the intention, but there could have been. It was open ended enough that he could have shown up again in a novel based the following year in Storm of Chaos in Miedenheim. He equally could have shown up in something else in Kislev.
I just felt with the girl that he had danced with the way had embraced the culture, that he should have just gone back and embraced them, but he didn't. He just like which I guess is kind of embracing them, this wandering off, but I don't know. Wasn't my favorite.
He wouldn't have fit on the step ponies.
He wasn't that big.
He's also not necessarily a useful member of society to have in the village. He hasn't got any tradable skills other than warriorness.
Well, do any of these guys? Well, do all of these guys have day jobs?
Well, they all sort of went back and did the harvest, didn't they?
Gurlek's not much of a harvest type of guy.
Exactly. So he's dead weight in the village.
Ah,
he can fight
because he's a rider. They're all dead. Wait.
Anyways, we should conclude.
But to use the comparison again, if we imagine sort of the end of The Last Samurai, you're not going back to be the useful person. You're going back to be the sort of upper class nobility. That's easy. Going back to working class farmsteading, no one does that after the assimilation, do they?
Yeah, nobody wants to do that. All right, so that's the end of our spoiler phase. We'll talk about some of our user questions. Just really, really briefly, what was your favorite part of the book and why, or way that the book was written and why?
Definitely Zvedka. Just the way they set up, introduced, presented, and followed through that battle was brilliant to me. It felt very organic, very gritty, huge amount of detail, good amount of overview and situational awareness. If more books out of Black Library could have scenes like that, I think it'd be much easier to push fantasy novels on the general public.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I enjoyed Zvedka a lot from a couple different standpoints. I thought it was, when I was a kid, when I was reading it, it was really cool to see like a coalition army, them talking about all the provinces and different types of Imperial units coming together. As I've read it, as I'm older, just kind of the foreshadowing and the foreboding, they don't beat you over the head with it, but it is pretty cool how they kind of show you that, hey, there's a sickness here, there's a darkness here, this is not going to end well. This marshal is, losing his composure. There's a bad air, and it's just kind of really cool how that all comes together, and then the slaughter that ensues. And then I really like Carl's character a lot. I mean, he's a sympathetic character. You're supposed to like him, and his kind of descent from proud Imperial to champion of Char is really, really well done, I thought.
Whereas I think my favourite character is probably Marshal Niebuhr and his assistant. Just again, it's what if you think about this in terms of, if this was a film, that would be the role that would end up getting the best supporting actor Oscar nomination.
Right.
Even though they've only been on for 5 minutes, just because it's just such a beautifully done role with an awful lot of depth crammed in.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about that much, but it truly was. His adjutant and him and their relationship was pretty cool. I think my favorite part of the book was just seeing those cultural changes and all the different bits of Kislevite culture and of Kurgan culture, seeing the way that they saw life. I guess, so for me, I think the favorite part was some of those bigger thoughts. I mean, I loved the description of the battle. I loved all that. But just the differentiation, thinking about how they all lived this horse cultural life, right? They all had that, and yet, in spite of having that, they dealt with it differently. The Kislevites had this, idea of, oh well, we're all dead already, and we're just gonna live with that fact. And so they didn't let I guess the immensity of it destroy them. They embraced it. But another thing was that, like, the Kurgan embraced and sought change, and the Kislevites accepted fate. So they both looked at kind of what was happening. And for the Kislevites, they looked at it as this circle, and it all comes around. And that's one of the things that they talk about. Heilemann talks about it, of this idea of a circle, and he believes that fate is a straightforward line, and that's what it is for Karl to some degree, right? Going towards power, and he doesn't. He sees it as a straight line, but it does end up coming around circle when he sees Karl again. So I thought that was interesting the way they saw that. The assimilation. Gerlich can't speak. Seeing assimilation in different ways, Gerlich couldn't speak the language of the Kislevites, but Karl could because of this sort of magic. And I really love that because it shows the way that for chaos and the embrace of chaos, a lot of it is about how easy it is. Why do they embrace chaos? Because it's an easier way to get power. It's an easier way to get this. And so, Karl can speak. It's easier than assimilation is for Gerlich. And so I thought that was fascinating. And then this idea of, like, forced change, which is what Karl goes through, versus this embraced or a change of choice, which is what Heilemann goes through. All of that, all those types of thematic things that are there are cool to me. My favorite character, Beledny, I think is really cool. I thought just seeing how he led Heilemann was interesting, and so I liked Beledny, I think.
I think main character I liked Karl the best, but like secondary level of characters, I really enjoyed that chapter 5 when they talked about Skarkita and describes the nature of a chaos slaver and just like a grotesque kind of lord and how he's carried on the palanquin and describing the whole scene. And I thought that was really evocative.
Cool.
And well done.
Cool. Well, we are going to ask this just a couple more questions. You will enjoy reading this book if.
I think as long as you're a fan of military history or military history novels, you will enjoy this very easily. Equally, if you're just into general sort of adventure stories, action, you'll enjoy this. It can be a little bit squeamish in places if your threshold for this is low.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, I think this is one of the better Black Library books that I've ever read. It's only about 275 pages, so it's not too long. And I think pretty much anybody who enjoys the Warhammer Fantasy Battle world will enjoy this. The good writing with regards to the combat scenes reminds me of Bernard Cornwell, if people like that, and Uhtred, sharp characters like that. And I only really have positive things to say about it. The only criticism I'd say is maybe the last 100 pages aren't as compelling as the first 2/3 of the book. It just doesn't. It doesn't flow as well, and they kind of speed things up, and it just kind of the first 2/3 of the book are probably more interesting and compelling than the last third.
Yeah. I'm going to take the easy way out and say you'll enjoy reading this book if you're interested in the Empire, Kislev, or Chaos. But it really did, because it delves into the culture and it's 3-dimensional. We've already talked about books and stories that connect to this one. So here's the last book. Oh, go ahead.
Can I throw one more in there? A lot of the locations and some of the events in this are referenced in the second edition fantasy roleplay supplement, Realm of the Ice Queen.
Okay.
So you can actually, there's a section on the big rock. You can have your characters go to the big rock and stand on the big rock and do a last stand if you want to. You can go to Chamondarek if you want to, and you
Okay.
can immerse yourself in some of this a bit more if that takes your fancy.
Gotcha. Thanks.
We also have to give it a rating out of 10 because since I give the other ones low ratings, this is an opportunity for me to not seem so.
Well, Mike, I'm going to spoil this for you because I'm going to require you to give it a rating out of 2 demilancers. How many demilancers is this worth out of 2?
But like a larger scale gives you more flexibility.
I know, that's why this is mean. Fine. It's 10 demilancers, Mike. Just for you, 10 demilancers.
I give it 9. The only knock I have is the last 100 page, the last third of the book isn't as is a bit slower, but I think it's great. I think it's a really good book. I give it a 9 out of 10.
I'd give it a 9 as well. Similar issue. It's very strong for 2/3, and then it really feels like the last third needed another 100 pages minimum just to give it enough breathing space. Even though most of the character development does come full circle and is fully fleshed out, you're in by that halfway point. You're into this enough that you want to see more detail and more of this. You don't want this glossed over.
Yeah.
There's too many pages of Gerlach in the steppe.
See, y'all have different opinions. Mike wants less. Kerry wants more.
Well, the Gerlach in the steppe was a few pages too long, probably, of him going insane out there.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to go with... Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I'm going to go with 10 of 10 demilancers because none of them died. Or actually, all of them died. Oh, wait, no, they're not winged lancers. Fine. None of them died. 10 of 10. They were not already dead because they're demilancers. That was it. So I'll give it 10 of 10. I just thought it was great. I thought it was interesting. Yeah, it did speed up at the end, but I didn't ever, and it could have had more, but I also felt it was fine the way it was. I really enjoyed it. So if you were to make a 2,500 point 8th Ed army from a faction in this book, or create a special character, or design a special scenario, what would it be? What would the list be? What would the rules be?
Well, I sort of alluded to this obliquely earlier in very obvious terms, but a couple of years ago I did put together a 10 scenario narrative campaign of the spring driving, of which all the battles, both in and tangentially mentioned in this, are included, along with accompanying special rules and interlinked scenario rules. At the point where this episode is released, I'm going to be putting it up on community content. So we have supplementary material for this episode. Yay!
Woo-hoo. If you have that map too of the route they take, that'd be good. But you said it was kind of convoluted.
I'll be inserting the map into the campaign before I post it, just for everyone's sanity.
Great. Okay. Well, since Kerry did this, Mike, now you have to have one.
But Games Workshop already did all this. They made a whole Kislev range and a bunch of scenarios.
Well, what battle would you do, or what special character?
I'm not good with these questions. I don't appreciate you asking me them.
Mike, you got to use your imagination. How else do you play the game?
Create a special character.
Who's your special character? Would it be Carl? You gonna have a dude in a helm with the blue?
I don't play walk. Everyone knows that about me. I guess I'd have to do Beledny as some sort of mounted hero. He wouldn't just be a unit champion. He would be something more. We'd have to get him into the Boyar class. I don't know if he can get to 3 wounds. Probably still only 2 wounds, which is going to limit his effectiveness. But I enjoyed him.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think for me, I'd like to see, and now I can't remember the name of the battle. What's the one with the last battle, actually? What's the last battle called?
With an M.
Yeah, Messerod. I would do that one because I think it would be cool to have the Chaos Warriors have to fight across, And then at some point, like turn 2 or whatever, or 3, the river that they're going across turns to ice, and now they can go across it more easily. So give it that kind of idea of something changes in the middle of the game that helps one of the sides. I think that'd be kind of fascinating to put into a battle. Thank you very much for your time. We're glad that you listened to The Heardstone. We hope that you'll listen again next time when we discuss the Beastman Army book. We'll be discussing the Beastman Army book next. All right, well, that's all we have for today. We hope that next month you'll gather around the Heardstone with us again.